Chapter 902. Auntie Jieli didn't want to betray Feng Ling, but boss was right in front of her. She really couldn't deceive a person who obviously knew the truth as a child. Not only could she not protect Feng Ling, but she might also irritate him. After hesitating for a few seconds, she slowly nodded. Yes. Li Nanheng's eyes were as dark as two bottomless pools of ink. Boss, don't blame her. Feng Ling has performed very well in the base for so many years. Except for her gender, she is no different from other boys, and I heard those boys say that they can't beat her. Look, she is so excellent. You can't drive her away just because she is a girl, right? Auntie Jieli tried to persuade him. I know the base has its own rules, but Feng Ling works so hard. I really don't want to see her driven away. Boss, don't blame her. Li Nanheng's face didn't change at all. He just glanced at her indifferently. What's the matter with that thing just now? Auntie Jieli said with red eyes. Feng Ling's period came today, but maybe it was suddenly advanced. She didn't prepare for it. I found the blood, so I gave her 2 pieces. I didn't know she was a girl until today. The more she spoke, the more anxious she became, and in the end her eyes were full of begging. Don't drive her away, boss. Li Nanheng's eyes were cold, and he suddenly turned around and walked out. Auntie Jieli was about to chase after him, but she saw the man's back was cold and determined. He was tall and had long legs, and now he had walked into the night outside the canteen. What should I do? Auntie Jieli glanced at the phone, wondering if she should inform Feng Ling. But judging from Boss Li's expression just now, if she continued to get involved in this matter, neither she nor Feng Ling would have a good time. And he was obviously going to settle the score with Feng Ling. It was useless for her to inform Boss Li now. After walking about 100 meters away from the canteen, Li Nanheng took out his cell phone and called Xiao Su expressionlessly. Pay Auntie Jieli's 10-year salary in the base cafeteria and give her $300,000 as a subsidy to persuade her to leave the base tonight. Tell her that I told her to keep everything she knows to herself and not to communicate with anyone. Xiao Su didn't understand. He was about to ask when he heard Li Nanheng's cold voice. You don't need to understand. Just do it. Xiao Su. Hey. The tall and straight man strode across the spacious road of the base. All the suspicious points in his mind were connected together, and his face was so dark that it seemed like ink was about to drip out. From the accidental glimpse in the sauna room of the orphanage, to the inexplicable inability to restrain himself every time, and the scenes in his dreams these days after returning to the base, he actually allowed a woman to repeatedly lie in front of him for so long, watched himself confess his love to her uncontrollably, and watched himself, a man of indomitable spirit, rather admit that he was gay than tell the truth because of this love. When he warned her to be honest again and again, she actually fooled him again and again. How much courage did she have to disguise herself as a man in a place like 11 Base? And who gave her the courage? After being almost discovered by him in the orphanage, she still dared to come to the base and approach him like this? He was really bold. She dared to raise a gun at him and would rather be sent to Rogers Pass than tell the truth. Very good. He walked back to the residence he shared with Feng Ling. When he passed downstairs, Kay and Tam were sitting outside smoking. Seeing Li Nanheng coming back from outside, they immediately stood up one by one and greeted him. Hello, boss. Li Nanheng didn't even respond and walked straight in. Kay turned to look at Tam in surprise. Did I see it wrong? Boss looked like he was going to take revenge. Tam, I think so too. Kay, who is he going to take revenge on? Tam pointed up. Probably, maybe, except for the few of us outside, there is only Feng Ling inside, right? Feng Ling hadn't gone to take a shower yet. She was a little upset because of what Auntie Jieli said just now. Many of the people in Team 3 liked to make trouble for her because they were not convinced. She didn't know if the sanitary pad incident would cause any trouble. Just as she changed the black trousers stained with a little blood, put on another clean pair of trousers and was about to take off her uniform jacket, she suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. Then the man outside didn't knock on the door but said coldly, "Open the door." As soon as she heard Li Nanheng's voice, Feng Ling paused and turned to look at the door. Although she didn't want to see him and had been hiding in the base for so many days, he was still her boss and he lived next door to her. It was so late. If he had nothing to do, he wouldn't suddenly come here. But she didn't quite understand why her eyelids were twitching. She walked over, hesitated for a moment and opened the door. The moment the man opened the door, his eyes fell on her face, and his calm eyes soon made her realize the danger. Especially when the man caught a glimpse of the trousers she had thrown in the basket in front of the bathroom door. His eyes were indescribably deep. Feng Ling's expression didn't change and her tone was calm and indifferent. "Boss, it's so late. What's the matter?" Li Nanheng didn't know how strong his willpower was to restrain his urge to strip her and said, "Go to my room and sort out the recent information on the computer. Type out the numbers and save it on the computer desktop." His voice was light, neither too loud nor too soft, but she could hear every word clearly. She could even feel the coldness in his words. This was indeed the job she had promised before. Feng Ling didn't suspect anything, walked out of her room and walked quickly to the next door. After Feng Ling walked out, Li Nanheng stood in front of the door, looked at the room that was still clean and simple without any trace of a woman and walked in. He walked to the bed and glanced at the black suitcase under the bed. He had seen her put this suitcase under the bed more than once. It was the same when they were on the snow mountain. A dream that he was not sure about suddenly popped up in his mind. It was so bizarre that he could not figure it out. In the dream he seemed to have bitten a piece of cloth that was wrapped around her chest and bit it open. What was that strip of cloth? The man's eyes narrowed coldly and he suddenly kicked the suitcase out from under the bed. Chapter 903. The suitcase was opened. A few clean and flat white breast wrappings were placed in the middle compartment of the suitcase. All the answers were completely revealed and there was no longer any possibility of concealment. Li Nanheng looked at those things indifferently, bent down, picked up the strips of cloth, looked at them briefly, put them back calmly, closed the suitcase and pushed it back under the bed. Then he kept squatting by the bed, slowly turned his eyes to the direction of the bathroom, got up, walked over, pushed open the bathroom door and saw a few toiletries placed there. There was still a faint fragrance inside, which was unique to Feng Ling. Turning to look at the table next to him, the man pulled open the drawer with one hand. Sure enough, there was a pack of sanitary napkins that only women would use. They were white and soft. Lying inside, it was as if the huge truth that had been hidden for many years had come crashing down on him. So it was really a woman. Next door. Feng Ling turned on the computer and quickly sorted out the documents. At the same time she looked back. She didn't close the door, thinking that Li Nanheng would come with her, but it had been a few minutes but he hadn't come yet. Could it be that he had been waiting in her room? With a loud bang, a clap of thunder across the sky pierced the sky, and a flash appeared and then disappeared. Feng Ling's face was slightly illuminated by the computer screen. Her eyes were calm and gentle, looking at the documents on the screen and carefully sorting them. However, these documents looked old. In her impression, she seemed to have seen these documents last time. Why did he suddenly ask her to sort out these old documents? Could it be that there were new instructions in the base? Just after Feng Ling sorted out the documents, she suddenly felt a prickling feeling on her back. Her fingers jumping on the keyboard stopped, and she looked back at the man who had stood in front of the door. After the man walked in, his eyes fell on her and he walked directly behind her. His eyes were on her. Feng Ling had never seen such a look in his eyes. And there seemed to be an obvious emotional change, but when she was about to see something, it seemed to be covered by something. Is there something wrong with these documents? Feng Ling asked subconsciously. Li Nanheng's eyes were cold and deep, and some things in his heart were endlessly vigorous. Some shock from the depths of his soul made him surprisingly calm. He took out a silver lighter from his trouser pocket and said lightly, "No problem. Tidy up your things. Don't ask more questions." Feng Ling glanced at him again, but the man had turned and pushed the window open, walking to the balcony of his room. Li Nanheng turned his back to Feng Ling, who was busy in front of the computer. He held his cell phone with one hand, took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. Listening to the sound of the keyboard and mouse behind him, he turned his noble face sideways and looked indifferently at the empty and dark base. Feng Ling didn't know why, but she felt a certain sense of oppression from his back. The man was smoking. She looked up at him and paused for about 10 seconds. The man turned his back to her, blew smoke rings into the night sky and said coldly, "Don't be in a daze. Go on." Feng Ling quickly retracted her gaze and stared at the screen, but her fingers on the keyboard slowed down a little. She didn't know what happened, but what the two people of Team 3 found today should have nothing to do with him. Besides, Auntie Jelly was so tight-lipped, so she definitely wouldn't say anything. Boss usually didn't like those people of Team 3, so he shouldn't have had a chance to see them at such a late hour. But out of worry, Feng Ling occasionally looked up at the man's back. However, she saw that he just stood there smoking and didn't want to say anything to her, force her to do anything or target her. Feng Ling. The man's low voice mixed with the heavy rain that gradually fell with the wind and thunder outside the window, with a different kind of charm. During the days when I had a high fever on the snow mountain, nothing happened? Feng Ling looked back at the computer screen, saved the file, marked the date and said calmly, "No." It seemed to be the expected answer. He was full of lies. Li Nanheng still maintained his rationality. Otherwise, he would have directly pulled out the dagger in his trouser shoe and cut her clothes. I suddenly remembered that the computer is full of old files from some time ago, and the new files will not be sent to the mailbox until tomorrow morning. The man said seriously, "Put it there. Don't sort it out." Suddenly remembered, Feng Ling stopped and looked coldly at the man on the balcony. "Boss, you are really forgetful." Hearing this, Li Nanheng turned his eyes and said slowly, "What else did I forget? Why don't you remind me? Maybe if you remind me a few more times I'll be able to remember what I should remember." "No." Feng Ling said with a straight face, "Boss, I guess you are too busy. It is normal for you to remember the wrong time. After all, you are the boss. Even if you ask me to take out the files from a year ago and reorganize them, I won't have any complaints." At this point she continued, "So, can I go back now?" Li Nanheng put out the cigarette butt in his hand and said indifferently, "Go back." So simple. It seemed that nothing had happened. Feng Ling felt a little nervous and instantly relaxed, but did he really ask her to come over to sort out the old files in the evening just because he forgot? Feng Ling felt that she really didn't pay enough attention to Boss Li's thoughts. Usually she didn't deliberately guess his thoughts, and now she couldn't understand him. "It's raining outside. Remember to close the doors and windows." Li Nanheng looked at the rain outside the balcony and said coldly, "It's almost winter. Don't wear too little." Hearing this, Feng Ling turned her eyes to him, but all she could see was the man's back. However, his words were more or less pleasant to hear. She nodded and left. However, after returning to her room, she looked at the things under the bed and everywhere around her. There were no changes that shouldn't have been there. It was raining heavily. This should be the last rain before winter this year. The wind was biting and cold, but compared with the cold wind on Rogers Pass, it was not worth mentioning at all. Chapter 904. No one could see Li Nanheng's expression at this time. The rain seemed to be peeping at some unpredictable secrets. It fell on the window quietly as if it didn't exist, but because of the light in the room it shone brightly. The man's eyes under his black hair were as deep as the sea. From the moment he learned the truth until now, a certain rhythm in his heart that had been unable to calm down had still not calmed down and was still beating at an uncontrollable speed. Even his breathing was a bit agitated. Turned out to be her. The bold little girl who jumped into his bathtub when he was an orphan and dared to get rid of their people and cars in a jungle when he was tracking her. She successfully escaped from the jungle and even left a provocative signal on the other side of the river. He knew that all kinds of coincidences couldn't be just a coincidence, but she was so fast and fierce that she didn't look like a girl at all. A thin little boy just wanted to stay in the base and he didn't need too much care and attention, but as time went by, even he didn't know when he began to be attracted to her. The light in the window next door was dim, but a few minutes later the curtains were suddenly drawn. The people inside couldn't be seen, but in the blurry light on the curtains he could see the boy. No, the girl was taking off her coat and then she didn't continue to take it off but walked straight into the bathroom. Seeing this scene, Li Nanheng suddenly touched the corner of his mouth with the tip of his tongue, and no one could understand the emotions in his eyes. Only the unlit cigarette that was crushed in his hand could feel his impulse to strangle someone at any time. The base archives room. The door was suddenly opened and the member who was on duty in the archives room woke up with a start. He stood up abruptly by the small window and saw that the person who came was Boss Li. He immediately came up in surprise. Boss Li?" The tall man held a black umbrella in his hand, and the umbrella was dripping water. After entering the door he said directly, "Give me the information of Feng Ling in the sniper team, including the information when she entered the base and the updated level information every year." The member of the archives room froze for a moment. "All." The man's eyes were dark. All right. Under normal circumstances, the files of the members of the base could not be taken out casually. However, since the person who came was Boss Lee, it was a different story. In any case, Boss Lee was in charge of the sniper team. It was likely that he had something to do. It was likely that he wanted to raise Feng Ling's training level. Not long after, with the information in hand, the man put the information into a waterproof file bag, turned around and walked out of the archive room with a black umbrella. After returning to his residence, Li Nanheng lit another cigarette but still did not smoke it. He threw the cigarette box on a stack of files in front of him and looked at the photos of Feng Ling in the base for several years. As the fair-skinned youth gradually grew up and matured, even the outline of the 2-inch color photo could clearly see the obvious changes in him. Other men's faces gradually became more defined as they grew into adulthood, but Feng Ling's cheeks were more and more similar to a woman's oval face. The curve was gentle and smooth, and although there was a heroic aura that other women did not have, she was clearly a woman. As the smoke lingered between his fingers, Li Nanheng looked at the photos on the files, and his eyes became darker and darker. He had been thrown into the base to train since he was a child. For so many years in this 11 base, there was a person that he felt he couldn't handle. The kind of person that he couldn't handle was not because he could let her carry out devil training at night at will, nor could he control the difficulty of her mission and life and death at will. But that person's heart. Li Nanheng pressed the cigarette into the ashtray, picked up the stack of files and read page by page. His eyes were calm and emotionless, but there was a layer of mist in them. He was indifferent and calm, but he did not lose the dominance of a superior. Li Nanheng thought that although he was the person in charge of the base, he did not have a strong desire to control. As long as the base members under his command could meet his requirements, it would be fine. But for such a Feng Ling, he found that he had a deep desire to control her. He wanted to firmly tie her to his side. She must cry because of him and she must laugh because of him. He was so frustrated that he thought he was gay. As a result, damn it, Feng Ling was a woman? Li Nanheng leaned back in his chair, holding the stack of documents with one hand. He threw all the documents into the drawer by his hand and pressed the other things on top. His movements were elegant but obvious. He locked the drawer and threw the key into the trash can by the door. When he looked at the trash can, his mind reflected the pair of silicone breasts in it when he came back from the bar. He knew that the feeling he felt at that time couldn't be more real. No matter how fake it was, it couldn't be so real that he, a man, couldn't not feel it. He should have known how tight-lipped Feng Ling, this dishonest guy, was. If someone else told her a secret, she would definitely guard it to the death and not spread it, let alone her own secret. It was such a big secret again. Feng Ling got up early the next day. After returning to the base, she was used to getting up early so that she could avoid Li Nanheng. However, when she opened the door and was about to leave, she suddenly bumped into the man who also came out of the next door. However, the man did not look at her because there was a water room on this floor. The drinkable water they usually used to make tea or coffee was there. The man held a transparent glass in his hand and walked straight in front of her without looking back. Feng Ling did not look at him but walked out quickly. When she turned the corner of the stairs, she paused for a moment and quickly turned to go downstairs. When the man walked into the water room, although he did not look in that direction, he saw Feng Ling pause there and quickly turned her head as if she wanted to pretend that she didn't care. Li Nanheng slowly curved his lips, and there was a trace of gentleness between his cold brows. The game began. Once, a mouse put on a cat's skin and swaggered through the market. Now it was time for the cat-and-mouse game. Morning training. Because of the heavy rain last night, the temperature suddenly dropped a lot today and the air was cold. Feng Ling's usual training state was similar to today's, but because her period came early, she felt a dull pain in her stomach. Sure enough, she caught a cold when she was in Rogers Pass. It would take her a while to recuperate. Chapter 905. Feng Ling shook her head. I'm fine. My stomach doesn't feel well. Xiao Fei looked at her carefully and then at her expression. Although he didn't know if it would be too abrupt, he still asked in a low voice, "Is it the days that women have every month?" Feng Ling immediately took a look at him. As a grown man, he knew a lot. Although she didn't want to say this kind of thing, she still nodded. But it's okay. Just train as usual. Now the sniper team was strengthening their training every day. Although the weather was cold, they couldn't easily stop or rest. After all, the United Nations and the US military were going to send all kinds of big shots here soon, especially to investigate the situation of the sniper team. Can you hold on? Yes. Okay, I'll just practice shooting today. Don't do other movements. Don't move too much. It seemed that she didn't intend to delay the training because of this kind of thing. Although Xiao Fei wanted to ask her to rest now, he looked back and saw the other four were still practicing, so he had to continue to let her practice, and only occasionally handed her a cup of hot water during the break. She went to the canteen at noon. Usually, Auntie Jieli was resting in the morning and only worked at noon and evening. Feng Ling wanted to thank her for what happened last night, but when she arrived at the canteen she learned that Auntie Jieli suddenly resigned last night and left the base overnight. Resigned? Was it because of her? Was it because Auntie Jieli wanted to keep this secret for her, but because she was an honest person she simply left the base for fear that she would cause trouble if she let it slip? Auntie Jieli had been living well in the base. If her secret hadn't been accidentally discovered by Auntie Jieli, how could things have developed to this point? Feng Ling couldn't eat much for lunch. She kept thinking about this matter. While others were still eating, she got up and went out to call Auntie Jieli. But after getting through, Auntie Jieli said that her phone had been turned off. Feng Ling was not reconciled. She was afraid that Auntie Jieli left because of something else, so she went back to the canteen to ask other staff and chefs, but no one could tell her the reason. They only said that Auntie Jieli packed up and left last night. She didn't say anything when she left, but she seemed to be very calm. She didn't seem to be angry or aggrieved. She didn't seem to have anything difficult to say. After packing up, she left without saying anything. This matter suddenly became a big stone in Feng Ling's heart. She had been absent-minded during the afternoon training and didn't sleep well at night. When he woke up the next day, his stomach did not hurt as much as yesterday, but there was still some vague pain. Moreover, his physical strength would not be as good as usual during these few days of the month, so he would feel tired easily. When they went for morning training, Xiao Fei probably already had an idea of what to do. He let them do some simple warm-up exercises with small movements, and then they continued to practice their shooting. They didn't do any exercises that were too big. During the break, Xiao Fei handed her a glass of water just like yesterday. Since yesterday afternoon, not only did you look bad, but you also seem to be in a bad mood. If there's anything, just say it. I'll help you solve it. Don't be alone. Feng Ling took the water. Nothing. It's just that Auntie Jieli suddenly left. It's hard for me to eat the food she cooks in the future. Xiao Fei immediately burst into laughter and raised his hand to rub her head. You don't look like a foodie. Don't you usually eat whatever you want? Now you are picky. How can you be so sad that an auntie of the canteen left? Feng Ling paused when Xiao Fei rubbed her head. She just glanced at him and didn't say anything. Li Nanheng, who went out to deal with a small case with the police yesterday and came back today, saw this scene when he passed by the entrance of the sniper team training camp. The man was wearing a white shirt and black trousers, but he wasn't wearing a suit jacket. Instead, he was wearing a black combat jacket. It wasn't particularly suitable for matching clothes, but on the man's tall and straight body, it gave off a different kind of handsome feeling. Li Nanheng glanced at Feng Ling sitting on the bench, holding a cup of hot water in her hand and obediently allowing Xiao Fei to rub her head, and a trace of coldness appeared in his eyes. After returning to the base, the first thing he planned to do was to change his clothes and change out of the shirt and trousers he had always hated to wear, but now it was clear that there was a more urgent matter. He turned around and walked straight into the training camp. Boss. Kay and the others greeted him, but Li Nanheng ignored them out of habit. They just smiled and greeted him. Anyway, boss was the boss. Hearing the commotion, Xiao Fei turned back to see the man approaching. Then he saw Li Nanheng approaching coldly. It seemed that his target was Feng Ling. He subconsciously took a step to the side and intentionally shielded Feng Ling, who was sitting on the bench behind him. At the same time he said, "Boss, the small case you cooperated with the police to solve has already been completed? The progress in the training camp yesterday and today is very good. The 5 of you are now very good at designing sniper rifles and can pass the inspection." Li Nanheng didn't have any warmth in his eyes. Seeing Xiao Fei shielding Feng Ling behind him in a protective posture, his eyes suddenly darkened. He took off his jacket and folded it in the crook of his arm. Just like that, he wore a white shirt in the weather that was 3 to 4 degrees below zero. He then casually pulled open a few exquisite and expensive buttons on the collar of his shirt, but the temperature in his eyes was frighteningly cold. Although her sight was blocked by Qiao Fei, the surrounding air seemed to be several degrees lower and Feng Ling could feel it. She held the glass cup in her hand, but her stomach was not very comfortable. If she could avoid provoking him, she'd better not provoke him. Anyway, Qiao Fei was standing in front of her, and it was useless for her to ask Qiao Fei to leave now. It's so cold that you have to sit on the training ground and drink hot water? Li Nanheng looked at Qiao Fei's face, but his voice was obviously speaking to the people behind him. Without waiting for Feng Ling to explain, Qiao Fei directly said, "Boss, the temperature has dropped in the past 2 days. There will be an important examination soon. We can't let them catch a cold or fall sick. I specially placed the thermos here so that they can drink more hot water." "Really? Why don't the others have hot water in their cups?" Li Nanheng glanced at the hot water on Feng Ling's cup and then coldly looked at the cups in the hands of the others. But when he turned back, looking at the hot water on the cup, thinking of her special situation in recent days, he instantly understood why she had to drink hot water these days. Chapter 906. Li Nanheng was about to bypass Qiao Fei and pull Feng Ling up, but when he was about to move, he caught a glimpse of several members of Team 3 who happened to pass by the training camp of the sniper team at this time. The members of Team 3 seemed to inadvertently look in this direction and then at Li Nanheng and Qiao Fei, who seemed to be confronting each other because of Feng Ling. They immediately turned back and whispered to each other. It seems that what they said last time was right. There is indeed something wrong with this Feng Ling. Is she really a woman? Could it be that boss hid a woman in the base so that he could do that at any time when it was convenient? Think so. Wasn't Deputy Drill Master Qiao in Team 2 before? When did he become so close to Feng Ling, who was assigned to the sniper team from Team 1? Just now, someone passed by and saw him pour hot water for Feng Ling. It seems that the other members didn't receive such treatment. Gee, if she is a man, she must have a problem with his sexual orientation. If she is a woman, then the problem is even bigger. The base explicitly stipulates that women are not allowed to participate in training or become members of the base. She is really a woman. Oh, it's really hard to imagine. Didn't they see those things in the canteen last time? I think it's very likely that the auntie of the canteen suddenly left, so there's no way to find the source of the truth. Is it possible that Boss Li is afraid that he secretly hid a woman by his side, so he... Shoo, don't talk nonsense. It's okay to guess whether Feng Ling is a woman or not, but Boss Li has not been in the base in the past few years. Didn't he return to the Li family at that time? I guess he is still in the dark. Who knows whether Boss has suspected it or not. Of course we are just suspicious, but I think this Feng Ling is really like a woman. From her height to her face, which part of her looks like a man? Feng Ling should be 17 or 18 years old now. I didn't see an Adam's apple in the past few years, but I think she should have one now. Have you noticed it? Does she have an Adam's apple? I haven't been too close to her, so I really didn't notice it. If she is not a woman, how can she use things like sanitary napkins? Can it be used by us men to pat our buttocks at night? Ha ha, mother asterisk her, lower your voice. Don't let anyone hear you. If that happens, all of us will have to bear the consequences. The question is she a man or a woman? They whispered to each other at the entrance of the training camp and took the opportunity to walk away. As they walked, they said, I don't know. I think it's very likely to be a woman. Let's find some time to test her. Although those people were far away, Li Nanheng could still roughly read their lips. He put one hand in his trouser pocket and glanced at Feng Ling coldly. The police station has been chasing the murderer of a criminal case recently. They need manpower and they need someone who knows how to use a sniper rifle. Since your training has met the standard, you don't have to worry about the inspection in a few days. Go to the police station to help for a few days. Feng Ling didn't say anything. Instead, she looked at Feng Ling coldly. Qiao Fei was about to say something when Feng Ling answered, All right, I understand. Tomorrow morning, pack your things and go to the police station. Bring a sniper rifle. There are a few snipers among the murderers. They will face them head-on. You go and cooperate with the police. Don't send anyone else to the base for the time being. Okay. She still had no doubt. When she was in the cafeteria today, although she was a little worried about Auntie Jelly, she noticed that some members of the base passing by seemed to be looking at her with a strange look in their eyes. The matter of the sanitary napkins must have been spread by the members of Team 3. No matter how Auntie Jelly explained it to them, no one was a fool. After all these coincidences, it was impossible for them not to suspect it. Of course they just suspected it. She had never been interested in other people's opinions. Although Xiao Fei wanted to say something, he couldn't interfere in the end. After all, he was just a drill master, not the person in charge of the base. Xiao Fei looked back at Feng Ling again, asking her with his eyes if she could handle the situation as a sniper for the police alone. Feng Ling gave him a reassuring look. Seeing the exchange of eyes between the two, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened, but he didn't say much. When he turned back expressionlessly, he looked coldly in the direction in which the members of Team 3 left, and said in a voice as cold as ice, "Leave tomorrow morning. The team allows you to go back to pack your things and report to the police station. You can skip the evening training." Feng Ling was really worried about continuing the training at night because of her stomach discomfort. She was afraid that she couldn't hold on, or that her menstrual blood would flow more and more because of physical overdraft and excessive exercise. Xiao Fei was too protective of her. At this time he couldn't be too obvious, so he couldn't let her rest, but he didn't expect that Li Nanheng would suddenly exempt her from the evening training. Did Boss Li attach great importance to this matter in the police station? The cold-blooded maniac who had always been extremely demanding on her body would ask her to end her training in advance one day? Feng Ling stood up with a cup of hot water in her hand. "I see, boss." Li Nanheng didn't look back but walked straight out. His back was indifferent, as if he suddenly walked into the training camp just now not for anyone but to deliver a mission order. That was all. While boss was gone, Xiao Fei said in a low voice, "That's good. You can also save 2 or 3 days of training. The intensity of the mission outside is not as high as now, but you must pay attention to safety. Besides, in the past 2 days there were a lot of rumors about Feng Ling in the base. Many people paid special attention to her, standing in the corner and deliberately looking at her. When standing in the eye of the storm, it was better to leave the base for a few days. When this group of people stopped talking about these irrelevant topics, they would gradually calm down. After all, they were all men and they wouldn't take it seriously." Feng Ling handed the hot water cup in her hand back to him. "Then I'll go back to pack my things first. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, thank you for the hot water." Qiao Fei took the cup. Just now, she just held the cup in her hand and hadn't had time to take a sip. He nodded and didn't say much. Feng Ling left directly. Qiao Fei turned to look at the direction in which Feng Ling left quickly, and then glanced at the direction in which Boss Li had gone far away, thinking. Chapter 907. However, he didn't say anything. Now that he had sent Feng Ling out at the most appropriate time, it was equivalent to letting her take this opportunity to avoid all the gossip. Could it be that not only did Boss Li not intend to chase her away, but he was also secretly protecting her? However, she felt that it was unlikely. The Li family had always been very strict with many rules and regulations in the base, and the few old masters of the Li family were even more strict with men than women. If the few old masters of the Li family found out about this, the base would definitely be blown up by them. Given Boss Li's rational mind, he probably wouldn't take such a huge risk to protect Feng Ling. Besides, rumors were spreading everywhere now. However, if he wasn't protecting her, it was clearly just a small task for the police, but Feng Ling was sent out alone. Early the next morning, Feng Ling carried her sniper rifle and left the base to head to the Los Angeles Police Headquarters to help. The task of encircling and annihilating the criminals this time was very simple. She only needed to shoot the criminal leader in the window of the opposite building at the top of a 60-story building at the mission location. The only test was her marksmanship, accuracy, and proficiency in using a sniper rifle. Because the police informant would take the risk to lure the criminal to the appropriate location from the window of the opposite building, she could only succeed and not fail. Otherwise, many police officers would die for this. The police officers didn't particularly trust her marksmanship, but after all, she was sent by 11 base, so they could only take the risk and cooperate with her. However, the final result was that Feng Ling had completed her mission extremely well. She had fired a sniper shot into the building across the street from over 300 meters away, blowing up the back of the head of the criminal leader. Then she had followed up with a shot to blow up the head of the most capable helper beside him, saving the police a lot of trouble. After 2 shots, she ended the mission. Feng Ling put away her gun and left directly without saying anything to anyone. However, just as she was about to return to 11 base, Xiao Su suddenly called her and said that the base would be hosting the VIPs in a few days, and there were still some things that needed to be prepared. He wanted to give her a list so that she could go buy the things after completing the mission outside and return to the base after she was done. After receiving the list from Xiao Su, Feng Ling saw that there were so many things on the list. Furthermore, she couldn't just buy all of them in Los Angeles. She still had to drive to the neighboring cities to buy them. Calculating the time, even if she bought all of them as quickly as possible, it would take at least 2 to 3 days. Why did it suddenly feel so good? Her stomach had been feeling unwell for the past 2 days, and she didn't want to go back to the base to feel the gazes of so many people. Feng Ling smiled and walked back to the car with the list in hand. She threw the gun in the car, got into the car and drove to the first stop. In a large shopping mall in Los Angeles, there was a food and seasoning area on the first floor of the mall. Feng Ling walked in and with a good sense of direction headed straight for the place where she wanted to buy the seasonings. She asked for 20 kilograms of seasonings from the shop assistant. This was what the base used to entertain distinguished guests when making certain luxurious dishes. It was said that this seasonings was called mi-si. Very few people had eaten it before and very few people knew what it was. The taste of this thing was very special and generally only very rich and tasteful chefs would buy it. Or perhaps, some countries would add this mi-si seasonings to certain dishes when entertaining distinguished guests, and the taste would be very delicious. However, the amount required at one time was too large, and it couldn't be bought in ordinary places. She had to buy it here. Moreover, this shop seemed to only prepare 20 kilograms of it every day. If she wanted more, she could only wait until the next day. After Feng Ling told the staff what she wanted, the staff nodded and went in. She waited outside. After about 10 minutes, she smelled a very light and elegant perfume approaching. She turned around and saw a young woman with a slim figure wearing sunglasses walking past. Feng Ling didn't know much about the brands and bags that women wore. She only saw an H on the bag and AJ on the shoes on her feet. She didn't see the other letters clearly, but it looked like they were expensive. Also, she vaguely felt that she had seen this woman somewhere before, but she couldn't remember clearly. The staff inside was just about to take out the 20 kilograms of seasonings for Feng Ling when she suddenly saw the woman walking in. She quickly walked up and asked. She didn't know what the woman said, but the staff hesitated for a moment before turning around and going back into the warehouse. After a while, she came out and said politely, "Miss Feng, this is the 20 kilograms of mi-si you wanted. It should be enough for the top chef you hired." Usually, such socialite gatherings would have a lot of dishes, and the taste would be even better with seasonings like mi-si. "Miss Feng, I didn't expect you to know about these things." Feng Ling stood at the side and glanced. At first, when the staff called her Miss Feng, she thought that he was calling her. She was wondering how this person knew that she was a woman. In the end, it was the person next to her. Feng Ling walked over. "I'm sorry, but isn't there a limit of 20 kilograms of this seasoning here every day? If I remember correctly, I was the one who came first. Also, when you went to the back to take out the things, you were about to give them to me. What's the meaning of this now? You're being interrupted halfway?" Her tone sounded gentle and calm, but her eyes clearly showed that she didn't intend to let the staff make the decision on their own. The staff was stunned for a moment, then turned to look at the so-called Miss Feng beside her. She was instantly put in a difficult position and said to Feng Ling in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Miss Feng is the eldest daughter of the Feng family. She has a VIP status in our mall. Besides, it's already very eye-catching for such a young lady to appear in such a gourmet seasoning area. If we offend her, we won't have an easy time. So, please wait for another day." Feng Ling smiled, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "I can understand you, but I believe that your mall understands the rules of first come, first served. Even if she's the first lady, she should abide by the rules." The staff was in a difficult position for a moment. Only then did Miss Feng turn around and glance at Feng Ling. Then she took off the sunglasses on her face and sized Feng Ling up from head to toe. Then she asked in confusion, "Have I seen you somewhere before?" After Miss Feng took off her sunglasses, Feng Ling saw her face clearly. When she heard her words, she finally remembered. That time in the hospital, when Madame Feng and Qin Shu were in her ward, the eldest daughter of the Feng family, Feng Mingzhu, had also come in once. At that time Feng Ling didn't pay much attention to her, but at least they had brushed past each other like this, so she had some impression of her. Chapter 908. Seeing that she was so straightforward, Feng Mingzhu immediately raised her delicate eyebrows, looked at Feng Ling for a while and smiled lightly, but the arrogance in her eyes did not diminish. I remember the ward shook took me into last time. Oh, by the way, you are from 11 base, right? Feng Ling didn't answer but turned to look at the shop assistant and put the card aside. This is the money for 20 pounds of seasoning. Hurry up, I'm in a hurry. The shop assistant didn't know whether she should take it or not. He turned to look at Feng Mingzhu. Miss Feng, this. Feng Mingzhu was still smiling. Little brother, we have a very important socialite gathering tonight. We've invited a world-class chef who needs this kind of seasoning. I happen to be passing by here, so I came to buy it on the way. How about I pay for 40 caddies and you can take the other portion tomorrow morning? How about that? It's a gift from me. Feng Ling's eyes were very indifferent. No, thank you. I'm not familiar with Miss Feng, so I don't need you to give me a gift. Besides, I don't need to explain the reason why I bought these things to you. Besides, the rule is first come, first served. I only ask about the rules, not the identity and not the price. Feng Mingzhu choked for a moment. Her pride from a young age had made her used to looking at others with a charitable gaze. After all, there was nothing in this world that couldn't be solved with money. She was already very polite, but this brat's temper was very stubborn. He didn't even give her face. He had heard from Qin Shuk that she seemed to like him. He had such a bad temper and wore a black combat uniform all day long. What kind of taste did Qin Shuk have? But her combat uniform. Feng Mingzhu's eyes paused, and then she maintained an elegant smile. Is it convenient for us to talk in private? No, it's not convenient. Feng Ling didn't intend to pay more attention to him. The shop assistant felt embarrassed. She felt that this young man's temper was not to be trifled with. Although he was very handsome and beautiful, he shouldn't be a person who would give up easily. And Miss Feng couldn't be provoked, so she decided to let the two of them discuss it. So the shop assistant quickly turned back to the warehouse, leaving a space for them to talk. Seeing that there was no one else around, Feng Mingzhu put the sunglasses in her hand into her bag, looked at Feng Ling and said softly, "You are Nan Heng's subordinate. You came out to buy these things because 11 base needs them? But we can't casually tell others about what happened in the base, right?" Feng Qi didn't have any intention of chatting with her, but this Miss Feng seemed to be implying something. He turned to look at Feng Mingzhu. Since Miss Feng knows about 11 base, I won't say any more nonsense. Of course I know 11 base. There seemed to be some pride in Feng Mingzhu's eyes as well as a little excitement. How about this? Let's discuss a condition? Feng Ling didn't want to talk about conditions. He was the one who came first. Even if she didn't understand the ways of the world, she knew that she was on the side of reason. Why should she talk about conditions? Feng Mingzhu continued to say, "As long as you can take me into your 11 base, I will give you these seasonings. It seems that you were sent out to purchase, right? If the purchasing mission is delayed, will it affect you? My conditions are not difficult, just bring me back to your base." Feng Ling swallowed the word impossible that was on the tip of her tongue and said in a calmer tone, "Sorry, Miss Feng, 11 base has a clear rule that outsiders are not allowed to enter at will. Don't you know that I am not an outsider? I am Li Nanheng's fiancé." When Feng Mingzhu said the word fiancé, her eyes lit up. It was not difficult to see that she liked Li Nanheng. It was not the first time that Feng Ling heard that Boss Li had a fiancé, so she was not surprised. And Boss Li had said that as long as it was not from his mouth, she should not believe a single word. Feng Ling said indifferently, "Miss Feng, I really don't know you very well. I am just a member of the base and I can't bring people into the base without permission. Since you are our boss's fiancé, why don't you ask our boss to take you there in person?" Feng Mingzhu seemed to be choked. If Li Nanheng was willing to see her and talk to her, she wouldn't need to run to 11 base to chase after her husband. The person she had loved for so many years refused to marry her, would rather marry her dead sister and didn't even want to see him. The matter between me and Nanheng is a bit complicated. No matter how complicated it is, it has nothing to do with me. I only know that there is a rule of first come first served when buying things outside, and I also know that outsiders are not allowed to enter and exit the base at will. Sorry, please excuse me. As Feng Ling spoke, she raised her hand and gently pushed her away politely. Then she bent down to pick up the bag of 10 kilograms of seasoning on the ground and turned to take it aside, determined that she must take this thing away and would not give it away. Seeing that she didn't get any benefits, Feng Mingzhu's face was no longer full of smile. She looked at Feng Ling for a while and said with a hint of mockery on her lips, "I can pay double or even 10 times the price to buy this thing. I believe that the shop assistant and the boss will not refuse to take it. Why are you so stubborn?" Feng Ling was expressionless. There are surveillance cameras in the shopping mall. Any behavior of forcing people to buy or sell things is illegal. Miss Feng, if you have graduated from primary school, you should know this. If Miss Feng really wants the things that 11 base wants to take away, you can talk to Boss Lee. There is no need to make things difficult for me. Besides, are you sure you want to snatch things from 11 base? Feng Mingzhu's hand on the bag immediately paused. No matter how powerful the Feng family was, the Feng family couldn't afford to offend 11 base. Besides, what she wanted to do was to leave a good impression in front of Nanheng, not to offend him or annoy him. Although she was unwilling for the sake that this boy came from 11 base, Feng Mingzhu didn't argue with her anymore. However, she still looked angry and forced a smile. "All right, then I'll give it to you. But after all, you owe me a favor. If I have any request, I don't owe you a favor." Feng Ling didn't give her a chance to act. She glanced at her indifferently and then turned to call the shop assistant to pay the bill. A few minutes later she turned and left with the bag, not even looking at her. Feng Mingzhu had never seen such an ignorant and impolite person, nor had she seen a man who was so ungentlemanly in front of her. He didn't give her any face at all. Her expression was ugly. She turned to look in the direction of Feng Ling's departure and heard the shop assistant next to her whisper, "Miss Feng, don't be too angry. This kind of stubborn person is mostly ignorant. I guess she doesn't even know how powerful the Feng family is. She is a frog at the bottom of a well. You don't have to be too calculative." Chapter 909. She didn't know if she was a frog at the bottom of a well, but she didn't give her any face at all. Feng Mingzhu held the bag in her hand and didn't say anything more. What was more angry was that Li Nanheng usually ignored her, and even the people around him were so rude to her. Did all the people from 11 base have such a temperament? Feng Ling didn't want to talk to that Miss Feng at all. After leaving the mall, she put the bag of seasoning in the trunk, closed the trunk and turned to get into the car. At the moment when the car door was opened, she suddenly felt a force. Feng Ling paused and turned her eyes expressionlessly, only to see that Feng Mingzhu, who had just pestered her in the basement of the mall, also came out. Glancing at Feng Mingzhu's hand on her car door, Feng Ling's voice was calm but obviously impatient. "What's the matter?" Feng Mingzhu continued to smile. "You know I am Li Nanheng's fiancé, but you still dare to be so indifferent to me?" Feng Ling looked at her indifferently and didn't answer, but her eyes clearly showed that she didn't buy it. The atmosphere was too silent and cold. Feng Mingzhu looked at her for a while and said, "What's your name?" Feng Ling didn't intend to hide it, nor did she feel guilty. "Miss Feng, if you feel wronged, you can report my name at any time so that when I go out to work in the future, Boss Lee can also tell me in advance to take care of you when I meet you outside, but Boss Lee has never mentioned your name before. I only listen to the orders of the base. Miss Feng, you really don't have to make things difficult for me." Seeing this, Feng Ling was neither servile nor overbearing. Feng Mingzhu coldly smiled and changed the topic. "Your surname is also Feng?" "Yes, unfortunately my surname is also Feng." Feng Mingzhu's smile became even colder. In the Chinese circle in Los Angeles, there aren't many people with the surname Feng. This is fate. Maybe our ancestors were a family for hundreds of years. Just help your family. Can you take me back to the base? Take your hand away. Feng Ling didn't look at her anymore and opened the car door. When she saw that she was about to push the car door, the impatience in her eyes became more obvious, and the simple words carried a warning. The Feng family also has a close relationship with the American military. We're all together. Even if we enter the base, it won't affect us. Besides, my relationship with your boss. Before she could finish speaking, the car door in front of her suddenly opened. Feng Mingzhu's wrist was almost broken by the force. The pain caused her face to pale. She stared in disbelief at Feng Ling, who had already opened the car door expressionlessly and sat in the driver's seat. "You." Without looking at her, Feng Ling buckled her seatbelt and closed the car door. She didn't even roll down the window to say another word to her and directly started the engine. Seeing that this brat named Feng Ling was really going to drive and that he didn't intend to hesitate at all, if she continued to pester him she might really be hit by the car. Feng Mingzhu glared at the person in the car through the window and could only take a step back. However, because her high heels were too high she stumbled and almost fell. The smell of car exhaust poured into her nose, choking her and coughing several times. She raised her head and looked at the car that drove away without hesitation and disbelief. She was so angry that she smashed the bag in her hand hard on the ground. Feng Ling drove the car away and continued to the next stop. There were many things to buy and she didn't want to waste time. When turning out of the intersection near the shopping mall, she still didn't look back at Feng Mingzhu who was left behind. But she had heard from Kay that some women were particularly delicate or liked to put on airs. Perhaps this Miss Feng was one of them. Sure enough, women were troublesome. Since she was a child she had never been in a circle with too many women. The number of women she had met could be counted with 10 fingers. But so far the most wonderful women she had seen were that Qin Shuk and this Miss Feng. One was innocent and clingy, and the other was noble and arrogant and born with the temper of a rich lady. She was so arrogant that people instinctively wanted to kick her in the face. If she had to pretend to live like this every day after becoming a woman she might as well cut off the 2 lumps of flesh on her chest. Feng Ling stepped hard on the accelerator and drove the car out of Feng Mingzhu's sight. At night the Feng family. After attending the socialite party, Feng Mingzhu returned to the Feng family's villa. She was a little tipsy, but when she entered the door she saw 2 white rabbit-shaped lanterns hanging in front of the main gate of the Feng family's house every year on this day. As soon as she saw the white rabbit-shaped lanterns, her heart was instantly filled with anger. With the anger she had suffered outside this afternoon, she ignored the housekeeper who came out to greet her and quickly walked into the door. Sure enough, when she pushed the door open she saw that Qin Qiu, who usually didn't come out of her room when she came home, was kneeling in front of the bodhisattva in the hall. "Mom, it's been so many years. Why are you still like this?" Feng Mingzhu angrily threw her bag on the table next to her, making a loud noise. "It's been almost 20 years. How long do you want to pay tribute to her? My sister has only lived in this world for a year. Our fate as mother and daughter is so shallow. Do you have to let me live in the shadow because of her? Do you have to let everyone know that I still have a dead sister? Ever since I was sensible I knew that I had a dead sister, but I didn't even know what she looked like. I never thought she existed, but every year you have to remind the family that her." Mingzhu. Grandmother Feng and grandfather Feng had just walked downstairs when they heard her voice. "Do you know what day it is today? You drank some wine outside and came back shouting. What do you look like? I really can't take it anymore. I was originally happy outside, but the moment I came home I saw the white lantern hanging at the door. She has been dead for almost 20 years, but every year on this day I have to hang a white lantern. I feel so scared." "What are you talking about? That lantern was the year your sister was born. Every time she cried in her swaddling clothes, your grandmother and I would use this kind of little rabbit lantern to coax her. Every time she saw the little rabbit lantern she would smile. The rabbit lantern is all white. It's not the scary white lantern you're talking about. As a sister you've been complaining for so many years." Grandfather Feng's face darkened. Chapter 9-10. Can't I complain? She has been dead for so many years and Mom has been depressed for so many years because of her. She doesn't even go out of her room. As long as she comes out she will kneel in front of Bodhisattva and pray for blessings. Feng Mingzhu said as she raised her hand to rub her forehead that hurt because of drunkenness. "I've had enough. It's precisely because you keep mentioning this person who doesn't exist anymore that the Li family would find such an excuse to marry a cenotaph instead of me. I've already been humiliated by the Li family, but you still want to hold a memorial ceremony for her at this time." Feng Mingzhu pointed to the emerald Buddha beads in Qin Qiu's hand and the old baby clothes that were spread on the table in front of her. "How long will this memorial ceremony take? Will our family live under the shadow of accidentally dropping the child into the sea for the rest of our lives?" Hearing her words, Grandmother Feng's face suddenly darkened. "Child, you, how dare you?" Grandfather Feng said angrily, "This year is your sister's 18th birthday, and it has been 17 years since she sank to the bottom of the sea. If she is still alive, today will be her coming-of-age ceremony, just like your coming-of-age ceremony. He should have the same glory as you. After all, you are the granddaughters of our Feng family. But now that she is gone, can't we hold a memorial ceremony at home? You're so angry just because we hung 2 rabbit lanterns. Do you want our family to lose their memories and completely forget about your sister? I really hope that the whole world can forget about her. Then perhaps there won't be such a big joke that Li Nanheng wants to marry our second daughter's cenotaph. I'm that big joke. Feng Mingzhu clenched her hands tightly. Mom, I'm also your daughter. Can't you put all your attention on the living? Do you have to spend so much energy thinking about someone who has been away for so many years? Today is your sister's 18th birthday. 18 years ago when she was born, our family was very happy. At that time you were very young and ignorant, but you also knew to surround the bed and laugh that you had a sister. We just want to commemorate her on such a day. As for other things, let's talk about it another day. Grandfather Feng frowned. Feng Mingzhu rolled her eyes at the 2 white rabbit lanterns hanging outside, picked up her bag and went upstairs. Her footsteps were so fast that it was as if all the people who were mourning the second daughter of the Feng family were lunatics. No wonder Mingzhu doesn't have any feelings for her sister. At that time Mingzhu was still young and didn't have a deep impression of her sister. Although what she said was a little too much, there's no need to take it to heart. Recently she has been unhappy because the Li family broke off the engagement. Just give her some time. Grandmother Feng's expression softened. She sighed and said softly. Qin Qiu, who had been kneeling in front of the bodhisattva, closed her eyes. After so many years she didn't love Mingzhu less, but she didn't put all her love on her. She often thought of her second daughter and would be sad. Every year on this day she would worship at home. After all, this was the poor child's birthday. However, in Mingzhu's eyes, her selfish thoughts and guilt towards her second daughter were very disgusting. She sighed, looked at the old clothes in front of her and couldn't help feeling sad. Los Angeles night market. The shopping was not over yet, so Feng Ling couldn't return to the base for the time being. The hotel near the night market was not expensive, so she found a quiet, inexpensive and good place to stay. She didn't eat anything in the evening and was hungry at around 9 o'clock. She walked out of the hotel and walked around the night market looking at the things on both sides of the street. However, in a few days, there would be an important inspection in the base, so she couldn't eat randomly in case she got a stomachache and affected her performance, so she bought a small pizza that looked good to eat. There were too many people in the pizza shop and there were no empty seats. Although the air was cold tonight, there was no wind. She took the pizza box and sat on a staircase in the middle of the night market. She took out the pizza and ate a few mouthfuls of the mineral water. From the corner of her eye, she saw a large cake shop not far away. Many young mothers and their children were buying cakes of various colors and flavors in the cake shop. They were full of happiness. Feng Ling looked at the various cakes in the cake shop window and bit the pizza in her mouth. When she was about to reach out to pick up the mineral water next to her, she touched nothing but a man's leather shoe. She paused, turned her eyes abruptly to look at the shoe she had touched, and then looked up along the man's black trousers. When she saw Li Nanheng's cold face, she suddenly felt her palms were hot and drew her hand back in fear. Li Nanheng looked at the crowd around him indifferently and then glanced at Feng Ling, who was sitting on the dusty stone steps and eating a vegetarian pizza. His cold and indifferent lips curved up when she didn't see it. He slowly walked down the stairs until he was many steps lower than where she was sitting, turned around and looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting there. The base asked you to come out to buy but didn't limit your expenses. There are places to eat everywhere. Why are you sitting here and eating pizza? Feng Ling was expressionless. I didn't want to eat dinner, but I was suddenly hungry, so I came out to eat. She didn't ask why Li Nanheng suddenly came out. Anyway, he was the boss and could come and go as he pleased. No one could control him. She didn't ask how he knew she was here. The car she drove out of the base was equipped with a GPS tracker, and every member would know her whereabouts when she went out on a mission. This was not surprising. When other people went out on missions, whether it was a helicopter or a car, they also had GPS. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and looked back at the cake shop nearby. You've been looking at the cake in that shop. Haven't you eaten it? I've eaten it. When the brothers in the base celebrate their birthdays, some people will occasionally buy it back, and I've eaten some. Feng Ling lowered her head to bite the pizza. There was something in her mouth and she said lightly, "It's just that kind of cream. It's nothing special." Li Nanheng glanced at her. "Do you want to eat it?" Feng Ling paused and raised her eyes to look at him. She watched as the man stood at the foot of the stairs with a pleasant expression, but at the same time, she thought about how cruel and shameless this man could be when he was raging. Chapter 9:11. Seeing Feng Ling raise the bottle to drink, Li Nanheng curved his lips. When she put down the bottle and looked at him again, his expression became cold and indifferent again. Feng Ling screwed the bottle and turned to leave. The man behind her glanced at her. "Come back. Why are you leaving?" She turned back to look at him. "Boss, I've just finished my task at the police station. I've been busy with the procurement this afternoon. It's already very late. I should go back to rest. Do you still want me to accompany you to walk the road?" Li Nanheng pointed to the cake shop with his chin. "Let's go eat cake first." Feng Ling stared into his eyes and was sure he was not joking. When their eyes met, everything this man did to her that night seemed to be still vivid in her mind. She looked away. "I'm already full." However, as soon as she finished speaking, the man held her wrist and pulled her toward him. Feng Ling barely stabilized her body so that she wouldn't lean into his arms. She raised her eyes and struggled to free her hand. She secretly hated him in her heart, but on the surface she still looked cold and impatient. Tonight's task is to eat cake." The man turned around. If she hadn't been struggling, he might have held her hand, but now that she was more stubborn than a donkey, he could only hold her wrist and pull her behind him. Feng Ling staggered to the door of the computer shop with him. She was about to speak, but the man didn't even intend to stop and let her in. After entering the door, the staff inside all looked back at them and rushed over. Because there were outsiders around, Feng Ling couldn't be too cold, so she could only pull her hand out and stand behind the man. Her expression was still a little impatient, but she didn't leave willfully. "Gentlemen, do you want to order a cake?" Before Li Nanheng spoke, Feng Ling suddenly said, "No, we just came in to take a look." Before she finished speaking, Li Nanheng glanced at her. His eyes were very indifferent but seemed to be warning her. Feng Ling turned away and pretended not to see him. The tall man walked straight in and saw that there was a place to sit and rest in the cake shop. He called the staff over and pointed to a small but delicate cake by the window. "What taste is it?" "There are blueberries and strawberries in that cake. It tastes very delicious. Sir, do you want to buy one?" Hearing there were blueberries, Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows, took out a card and handed it to the staff. "This is it. We'll eat here. We'll book the space inside for the time being. Don't let others disturb us." The clerk took the card from him and saw that it was a black card. He immediately nodded and said eagerly, "All right, please wait a moment, sir. We'll bring it to the table inside right away. Please take a seat inside." Li Nanheng did not speak again. With one hand in his trouser pocket, he turned to look at Feng Ling, who was still standing in front of the door. He saw that her face was expressionless, but from her clenched fingers, he could see the hesitation in her heart. "I've already bought it. If you don't want to eat it, you can dispose of it. Come and sit down," the man said coldly and walked in. Feng Ling looked to the side and saw that the staff were about to take the cake in, so she walked in. Seeing that Li Nanheng chose a spacious seat, she walked over and sat down in front of him. When the staff brought the cake over and asked them what they wanted to drink, Feng Ling put the mineral water in her hand on the table. The staff understood what she meant and didn't dare to ask any more, turning to leave. Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling's unapproachable expression. "There are some milk tea drinks in this shop. Don't you want to try them?" "I'm not interested." Feng Ling put the water in her hand. "Then let's eat the cake. I remember Kay said you like blueberries. There are blueberries in this cake. It should suit your taste." Feng Ling looked at the cake in front of her and pursed her lips. "Boss, just this once. Don't do it again. I just took a look outside and didn't say that I wanted to eat it." "Then eat it this time. Don't talk so much nonsense." Li Nanheng threw the silver lighter on the table, intending to sit here and wait for her to finish eating. Feng Ling had to pick up the small fork and cut a piece of the cake. After thinking for a while, she cut another piece and put it in front of him. The man didn't eat it but focused on watching her eat the cake with the small fork. Feng Ling was really uncomfortable being stared at by the man like this, but she felt even more uncomfortable if she looked up at him. So she could only lower her head and eat in small bites. Although the taste of this cake was really good, sweet but not greasy, and the taste of the chopped blueberries and strawberries was very good, she had just eaten pizza and couldn't eat so much at once. She could only taste it. This cake was not big and she felt that she could only eat half of it at most. After being stared at for a long time, she raised her head and instantly met the man's eyes. Her hand holding the fork paused for a moment. "Why don't you eat it? I'll just watch you eat. I'm not interested in dessert." As the man spoke, he saw that she liked to pick blueberries and put them in her mouth first. Seemed that she really liked eating blueberries. Feng Ling didn't really understand people like Li Nanheng. Didn't they say that when they liked someone many people would be embarrassed to speak up? Even men would express their feelings tactfully, but Li Nanheng was really honest with her. If he liked her, he liked her. If he wanted her to eat the cake, he wanted her to eat the cake. He didn't even have a roundabout way. She could only continue eating. Not long after, she heard the man's seemingly casual tone. "You don't know when your birthday is?" Feng Ling made an N sound, sipped the sweet cream in her mouth and said in a low voice, "The date of birth written in the information was only temporarily set by the person who took me in when I was young. I really don't know when I was born, so I've never taken my birthday too seriously." "You don't know who your parents are?" Feng Ling looked up at him and thought for a moment. In the end, she didn't tell him that she grew up in a wolf cave. After all, those hardships had long passed and there was no need to mention it. She only answered, "I don't know. I've been an orphan for as long as I can remember." Li Nanheng watched as she clearly faced an unknown and confused past, but never complained, nor was she pretentious at all. Li Nanheng didn't say more. Although he wanted to pretend to be cold and indifferent, his heart still softened. And continue eating the cake. The man picked up the lighter to light a cigarette, but hesitated for 2 seconds. He didn't move and stayed by the table to continue watching her. Chapter 9:12. After leaving the cake shop, Feng Ling planned to go back to rest. But because of Li Nanheng's presence, she couldn't say it out loud. She was afraid that he would say that since they were both men, he could just stay in her room for one night. Thus, she passed by the hotel in the night market. She went back and forth several times, but Feng Ling never said that she would go back. He wanted to see how long she could hold on, so he quietly accompanied her around the night market. In the end, he bought a bunch of unnecessary things and carried them in his hands. There were more and more of them. At nearly 11 o'clock in the evening, the night market was about to close. Feng Ling resisted the urge to yawn. "Boss, are you busy in the city tonight? If you have something to do, I won't disturb you. You can go back first." Li Nanheng's expression didn't change. "Nothing. It's getting late. I can stay nearby for one night." Feng Ling. "Boss, help yourself." Seeing her dodge, Li Nanheng smiled lightly, but there was no obvious smile in his eyes. He only watched her fair little face when she turned away and then glanced at her deliberately short hair. "Do you want to find your parents?" Feng Ling then looked at him. "How?" "If you want, you just need to report your DNA to the police and I'll send someone to supervise them. If your parents are still alive, it won't take long to find them. After all, technology is so advanced now. As long as you want, you can find them." Feng Ling was silent for a moment. "Forget it. I've never thought about this kind of thing. I've been used to being alone since I was young. Besides, I'm not sure if they didn't want me at all, so they threw me away. Why should I look for them? Even if it's just an accident, it has been so many years. I guess they have other children and a happy family and they should have forgotten me. No one will forget their children. Boss, I'm not good at communicating with people. Even if I really find out who my parents are, I won't go back to them. I'm fine now." Looking at her calm expression, Li Nanheng raised his hand to rub her hair, but the moment he raised his hand he paused, put it back into his trouser pocket and said indifferently, "It seems that you have deep feelings for 11 base. 11 base is the only place that gives me a sense of belonging." Feng Ling answered truthfully. Seeing the trace of exhaustion in her eyes, when the two of them passed by the hotel, Li Nanheng stopped. "Go take a rest. After the shopping, go back to the base. Don't run around." Feng Ling nodded. After Li Nanheng left, Feng Ling lowered her head to look at the pile of things in her hands. There were half-eaten cakes in boxes as well as some things that she had bought from some stalls. There were all kinds of things, but why were most of them pink? She had clearly said that she didn't mind, but the colors Boss Lee chose for her were so girlish. But it looked really good. After another 2 days, Feng Ling brought the things she needed to buy back to the base. In the past 2 days she didn't train so frequently, and her stomach was no longer so uncomfortable. Her period was almost over, and she could prepare for the various inspections of the United Nations and the U.S. military at any time. On the night before the visit of the inspection team, while there was no one on the training ground, Feng Ling went to practice with a sniper rifle alone. However, when she arrived at the training ground, she heard several gunshots and saw that Kay was practicing even earlier than her. What a coincidence! Hearing the footsteps, Kay turned around and saw her. He immediately smiled and sorted out the remaining bullets with the gun in his hand. Then he looked at the gun in her hand. No wonder you're so good at the exams. Do you often come out at night to practice by yourself? No, I rarely come out at night. There will be an inspection tomorrow. No matter what, I have to pay attention to it. Feng Ling also walked over. However, as soon as she walked over, she suddenly saw that the other three had also come. The five of them looked at each other and laughed in an instant. Tam said, "It seems that everyone is the same. Our sniper team was taught by Boss Lee and Drillmaster Qiao every day. We must not lose face for the base. Seems that we all understand this. We actually all came at the same time in the evening. Although they had trained for a whole day during the day, the five of them were still in high spirits at this time, practicing shooting and laughing wildly. Such a peaceful night, when they recalled it many years later, still felt their blood boiling." The next day the inspection team arrived. There were about 17 or 18 people. It was said that they were all high-level figures of the United Nations and the military who were rarely seen. Although the management of 11 Base was militarized, there were times of freedom and occasional laxity, but this time they lined up neatly and no one was perfunctory. There was no need for the drill master and elderly to say anything at all. Everyone knew the importance of today's task, so everyone took it seriously and did not hesitate. After an entire day of inspection from the elite squads to the rookie squads, and then to the other major training camps such as melee combat, long-range shooting and long-range high-energy sniping, all of these specialized training camps were all inspected. After the inspection, it was time to see the abilities of each team. In the evening, the 5 members of the sniper team appeared as the finale. The 5 of them performed a beautiful long-range sniper from 300 meters away. All of them hit the bullseye and their penetrative power was extremely strong, consecutively piercing through 3 targets. When the 5 of them first entered the sniper team, they were ranked first, but after so many months of training, the 5 of them were now almost equal in ability. Only Li Nanheng and Xiao Fei, who personally supervised the sniper team every day, knew how much effort each of them had put in, including last night when the 5 of them secretly went to the training camp to continue training. Although they did not break the harmonious atmosphere of hard work, they were well aware of how outstanding they were and how united they were. After a whole day of inspection, almost every training camp won applause. 11 Base was indeed 11 Base. It did not live up to its reputation. The appearance of the sniper team was even more resounding. A certain leader of the United Nations who had only occasionally applauded, couldn't help but clap harder when he saw the achievements of these 5 people. Chapter 9:13. In the evening at 11 Base's celebration party, the sniper team was praised by the leaders one after another. After 3 rounds of drinks, a very influential leader in the U.S. military named Danny Ken specially went to the table where the members of the sniper team were seated and sat down to speak with them. He even sat next to Feng Ling and praised her even more. From time to time he would ask her how old she was and when she entered the base. In short, it was not difficult to see that this Danny Ken seemed to be very interested in Feng Ling. Feng Ling was not good with words, so she could only answer whatever was on her mind. Li Nanheng was chatting with someone at the table of the UN leaders. Glancing at Feng Ling's awkward situation, he smiled and said something to the person next to him, put down the glass in his hand and turned to walk over. "Mr. Danny Ken." As Li Nanheng approached, he casually patted Feng Ling's shoulder. At the same time he turned to look at Danny Ken, who was seated by her side. Although these brats from the sniper team did shine brilliantly today, they are usually busy with training and missions. They aren't very good at socializing and are afraid of saying or doing the wrong things. They are even more reserved when sitting with someone of your status. Mr. Danny Ken, please don't take it to heart. I don't mind. Danny Ken chuckled. He then glanced at Feng Ling, who appeared rather reserved. "I'm just here to ask this little brother how old he is this year. He doesn't look old, but from his performance today I can tell he's very outstanding." Feng Ling nodded. Li Nanheng curved his lips slightly and pressed his hand against Feng Ling's shoulder. Only then did Feng Ling react. She immediately stood up and said, "Mr. Danny, I'm sorry. I need to go to the bathroom. Let our boss sit here and accompany you for a few drinks." With that she got up and looked at Li Nanheng's eyes. She understood what he meant. He wanted her to leave first, lest it would be too embarrassing to sit here and chat with him. She really didn't know what to talk to him about. At this moment she was also grateful that Boss Li could understand her mind. She looked at him inconspicuously and quickly turned to leave. Li Nanheng sat down, poured 2 glasses of wine and drank with Danny Ken. At the same time they chatted about the base, but the topic eventually returned to Feng Ling. After Feng Ling returned from the restroom, Danny Ken turned to Feng Ling and said, "The U.S. military sniper team also goes through very professional training. This year we just recruited a batch of new recruits. They're not very old, but they're all very impetuous and not easy to manage. I see that little brother Feng Ling is about the same age as them, but he's already so accomplished. If we invite him to train with our sniper team for 2 months, he should be a very good role model." Hearing this, Li Nanheng's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes. He put the wine glass on the table. Feng Ling and the other 4 members of the sniper team also understood Daniken's meaning. He wanted Feng Ling to help the American sniper team, taking the outstanding members of 11 base to the military team. If they wanted to poach them, wouldn't their purpose be too obvious? Seeing that Feng Ling's expression did not change, Danny Ken said again, "Little brother Feng Ling, you don't have to think too much. We just hope that you can go to our team and set a good example for the new members. We'll let you come back in at most 1 or 2 months. Although we do admire you very much, of course, we don't have the guts to poach someone from Mr. Li's team." "Don't you think so, Mr. Li?" Danny Ken looked at Li Nanheng beside him with a smile. Li Nanheng curled his lips indifferently. It seemed to be a smile, but there was no warmth in his eyes or voice. "Mr. Danny Ken, you must be joking. It's not that I'm arrogant, but if someone really wants to poach someone from my team, I'm afraid it won't be so easy." Danny Ken looked at the 5 members at the table with a smile. "Really? If the U.S. military offers better treatment to the 5 members of the sniper team, won't you consider joining the military team?" The 5 people at the table looked at each other and didn't speak. Did they think they were stupid? No place was better than 11 base, especially the place of these Americans. They were too self-righteous and thought that everyone in the world wanted to join their army. In fact, every member of 11 base was quite disdainful of them. They didn't know where they got their confidence from. But they didn't speak. In this situation, even if 11 base and the military were evenly matched, as long as Boss Li didn't break the superficial peace, they naturally wouldn't talk nonsense. Not getting the response he wanted, Danny Ken raised his eyebrows and looked at Feng Ling. "This time, we want to invite little brother Feng Ling over just to exchange pointers between 11 base and the U.S. military. We don't mean anything else, but if we really want little brother Feng Ling to join us in the future, we may offer a generous bonus of at least $3 million a year. Little brother, won't you consider it?" Feng Ling smiled politely but didn't answer. The other 4 also didn't speak, but they were instantly amused. The people in the military were really arrogant. They probably thought that they were the only ones with the most money. But they didn't know that the United Nations had always been on 11 base's side. Whether it was the public funding from the United Nations or the Li family behind this base, they didn't lack money at all. Not to mention Feng Ling, who could get hundreds of thousands of dollars every time he went out on a mission. Even the other newcomers in the base could easily make a lot of money in a year. They used money as a temptation. It could be seen how ignorant the military was and how much they didn't understand 11 base. Li Nanheng also glanced at Feng Ling at this time. "Do you want to go?" Boss Li suddenly asked, and Feng Ling answered directly, "If it's just to learn from each other for a month or 2, I can accept it. I don't need any reward. As for the rest, thank you very much for your praise, Mr. Danny Ken. I have a deep affection for 11 base and will not leave easily. Besides, I don't lack money." Boss Li nodded. "I don't lack money." These simple and pure words became an invisible slap on Daniken's face. Chapter 9:14. Feng Ling didn't respond directly but turned to look at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng also had a faint smile on his face and no one could tell what he was thinking. The man's slender fingers played with the wine glass in his hand, and the smile on his lips widened. But those who knew him knew that this kind of smile was full of danger signals from Boss Lee. Even if he said he wouldn't poach people, he still did it blatantly. Mr. Daniken really thought that Boss Lee was too lazy to argue with the military, so he could let them be so shameless. Since Mr. Daniken has spoken, Fong Ling, pack up your things and go back with him tomorrow. Li Nanheng smiled slightly. When Daniken raised his eyebrows in satisfaction, he gently put the glass on the table, and the bottom of the glass made a muffled sound on the table, which made people's hearts tremble slightly. He still said calmly, in order to express the sincerity of our 11 base, it seems that only sending Fong Ling to show our sincerity is not enough. Can you go with Fong Ling tomorrow? Kay immediately understood what Boss Lee meant and said, okay. Daniken chuckled. Why? Mr. Lee, are you still worried about our military? You're worried about taking one away, so you sent another to watch over her? Kay said with a silly smile, Mr. Daniken, don't get me wrong. Our boss has always been such a generous person. When he gives gifts to others, one is enough, but he just has to give two. You just want Fong Ling to go to your place to compete with the members of the military sniper team, so you just bring me along. In fact, I'm really honored. Daniken put on a fake smile. It seems that Mr. Lee is really generous. Li Nanheng smiled and stood up. When he walked past Daniken, he patted him on the shoulder from behind, as though it was a gesture made between men to express their deep friendship. However, the strength of his palm seemed to be a silent warning. Excuse me. The man's voice rang behind him and he returned to the previous table, leaving the table in silence. Just now they were still talking to Mr. Daniken, but now they obviously received a hint from Boss Lee that Mr. Daniken's purpose should not be so simple. So the table was silent at this moment. Everyone ate and drank, but no one paid attention to Daniken, who still wanted to talk to Fong Ling. Seeing that he couldn't get any benefits here, Daniken simply drank with them, and then got up with a smile and returned to his table. After returning, he said something to a very fat military leader at the table. The fat leader looked back at them and then at Fong Ling's back. He didn't say anything but nodded as if he was very satisfied. Seeing this scene, Kay immediately turned to look at Fong Ling, who had been eating in silence. The military invited me so directly and said so officially. I have to go, but boss sent me to accompany you. They must have other plans. They asked me to accompany you and help you at any time. Don't worry, I'm here. Fong Ling, I'm not a little girl who needs to be protected. Boss must have his purpose for sending you with me, but it can't be to protect me. Kay tooted. You don't understand. Even if you are not a woman, boss has always regarded you as a little girl who needs his protection. Fong Ling immediately squinted at him and Kay glared back at him. You don't believe me? Boss usually treats you very well. Kay, there are so many people here. Don't talk nonsense again. Fong Ling warned him in a low voice. Tet, every time I tell you these things you don't believe me. It's common for men to like men, especially in the United States. Even the military leaders have such people. Don't you believe me? Kay said and quietly pointed to the fat leader to whom Daniken had just approached. It's this one, the commander of the military front line. What's his name? I forgot. Oh, just call him Fat Commander. He likes men. I heard that he has a crush on several men in some military teams. Speaking up to this point, Kay's expression suddenly faltered. He lowered his voice and leaned close to Fong Ling's ear to say, Shit, could it be that damn fatty has taken a fancy to you? Fong Ling's hand paused and looked at Kay hesitantly. She didn't know much about these things. Seeing her confused expression, Kay hurriedly whispered to her ear, I just heard that this fat commander likes men, especially fair and beautiful men. He has played with many men. All the men in our base are tough men, but you look the most delicate and tender. I guess he likes you. Otherwise, why would Daniken suddenly ask you to go with them? Oh my god, they have bad intentions towards you. No, I can't do this. I have to talk to boss. Kay got up, suddenly ran to Li Nanheng's table and whispered, Boss, come out with me. Li Nanheng glanced at him. What's the matter? Come out with me. I have something to talk to you. Li Nanheng got up and Kay followed behind him. When he passed by Fong Ling, he even winked at her. Seeing Kay's expression, Li Nanheng didn't speak. After walking out of the banquet hall, Kay looked around and quickly said, Boss, does Daniken have any ulterior motives? I heard that the fat commander seems to like fair and clean little boys like Fong Ling. Kay said this with a mysterious look on his face. Li Nanheng said indifferently, "You know a lot." Kay immediately laughed. "Ah, of course, I was an intelligence officer in some places before I entered the base. I know what to do. No matter what they say or do, remember to follow Feng Ling at all times. Don't let her leave your sight. Within 5 days, there will be a mission in the base that needs a sniper. They can't hide this reason, so they must send you back openly." "Shit, no wonder you agreed so readily. I thought you really planned to let us go to their place for so long." Kay raised his hand and scratched his head. "Then Feng Ling, just follow her." Oh, if I can't leave her sight, should I sleep with Feng Ling at night?" Li Nanheng immediately took a deep look at him. He did not speak but smiled. The smile in his eyes did not reach his eyes. He raised his hand and pressed hard on his head. Chapter 9:15. In the banquet hall, Feng Ling's table didn't only attract the attention of the military leaders. Several members of Team 3 had been wondering whether Feng Ling was a man or a woman since some time ago. These suspicions and news first spread like wildfire from Team 3, and then gradually spread throughout the base. Others might have only been curious and suspicious at first, but after 2 days they forgot about it and didn't take it seriously anymore. After all, Feng Ling was still Feng Ling and they didn't see anything wrong with her. However, the members of Team 3 often chatted together. As time passed, the question about Feng Ling's gender seemed to have become a knot in their hearts. As long as they didn't open this knot, they couldn't help but want to see her. Just now, Mr. Danny Ken first went to Feng Ling's table. They didn't know what they talked about, and then Boss Lee also went over. No matter how much attention this sniper team received, the gap between them was too big. The members of Team 3 who were left behind by Team 1 and Team 2 and the sniper team because of their performance, abilities and various reasons, couldn't help but look in Feng Ling's direction. There were more Western-style dishes in the banquet hall, and of course there were many Chinese dishes specially made by chefs. Most of them had to get up and bring a plate back to eat as if they were eating a buffet. Tam sat in the inner side and was too lazy to move. When Feng Ling got up to get some fruit, he handed his plate to her. "Help me bring 2 fried chicken breasts back." Feng Ling took the plate and went over. She had just put the fried chicken breast that Tam wanted on the plate, cut it piece by piece with a knife, sprinkled the seasoning and was about to turn around to take it back. Suddenly, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the gazes coming from the table where Team 3 was sitting. She knew that some rumors had come from Team 3 and knew what they were looking at. She didn't turn around to look at them and turned to leave. However, after taking a few steps, she clearly felt the sharpness of their gazes. Then her gaze froze and her eyes turned cold. She quickly dodged the legs of 2 of them, and before they could retract their legs, she pretended to lose her balance and deliberately stomped and kicked their ankles. In an instant, the 2 of them were in so much pain that their faces turned pale, but they didn't dare to make a sound in public. They could only endure the pain and press themselves against the edge of the table. Only then did Feng Ling turn to look at the few people on the table. She curved her lips coldly, but her smile did not reach her eyes. "Sorry, I didn't stand properly and almost fell. Are you all right?" The 2 members of Team 3 endured the pain in their ankles, their faces pale and their voices muffled, but they didn't say much on the surface. They just shook their heads and said, "No, I'm fine." Feng Ling smiled and looked away. "It's good that you're fine." She was about to walk back when she saw another person suddenly stand up with a full glass of wine. Then he imitated her posture of almost losing her balance. Looking at the angle at which the glass was tilted, it was clear that he was going to pour all the wine on her. Feng Ling took a big step back and then raised her leg, seemingly inadvertently supporting his abdomen with her knee when he fell down. She seemed to want to help him, but in fact at the moment when the other party fell down, she used this posture to hit his abdomen hard with her knee and at the same time, kicked his arm hard with her leg. The full glass of wine in the man's hand suddenly spilled on the head of the member of Team 3 next to him. At the same time, he instantly lost control and fell to the ground, falling together with the broken pieces on the ground. One of them was drenched with wine and his entire face changed. The other fell heavily to the ground. Before the 2 of them could react, Feng Ling had already walked past them as if nothing had happened. At the same time she said coldly, "Be careful." No one knew if these words were to remind them to be careful here or to remind them to be careful in the future. The other members of Team 3 sitting around the table looked at each other and then at Feng Ling's back as she walked away indifferently with the plate in her hand, and their faces immediately turned green with anger. Qiao Fei was just by the side. Seeing this scene, he could tell that the members of Team 3 wanted to pour the wine on Feng Ling's chest. Such a blatant test. Did they know something? He got up and walked over to help the member of Team 3 who was struggling to get up. Seeing him holding his stomach and grimacing in pain when he got up, he raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong with you guys? Don't tell me you're not targeting Feng Ling. He's not in the same training camp as you guys and we rarely interact. How did Feng Ling offend you?" "Brother Qiao." The man covered his stomach that Feng Ling had just hit and said with some pain, "We didn't mean anything else. Don't misunderstand. We're not targeting him. We were really careless just now." "Careless? You almost spilled a full glass of wine on him. This is carelessness. Don't you know how Feng Ling has always won? His skills and speed, even the three of you together may not be able to beat him. How dare you play tricks on him? Do you really want to die?" That person pressed his stomach and his expression immediately darkened. He then turned to look at Feng Ling, ignoring everything else. His curiosity was too strong. In the end, he couldn't help but say, "Brother Qiao, don't you think Feng Ling is like a girl? We don't have any other intentions. We just want to know if he's a man or a woman because of the recent rumors in the base. We originally wanted to help her take off her clothes with this incident. So, we really don't have any other malicious intentions." Hearing this, Qiao Fei immediately raised his eyebrows and snorted. "I knew you guys didn't have good intentions. Sure enough, what are you planning? Usually when you go on missions, your Team 3 is always protected by the members of other teams, but now you actually directly target the people in front of you." The man immediately looked a little ashamed. "No, I'm really curious." "There's nothing to be curious about," Qiao Fei said coldly. Qiao Fei coldly and indifferently said, "I've been in the sniper team for so long. The last 2 times Feng Ling needed medicine, I personally took off his clothes and applied medicine for him. Aside from his fair and thin appearance, he's a pure man. You don't have to keep guessing. The base is filled with men. Don't do those things that only women do." Hearing this, the other members of Team 3 immediately got up and came over. They leaned over to Qiao Fei and asked in a low voice, "Is he really a man?" Chapter 9:16. We have lived in the base for so many years. Even if you haven't seen it, it doesn't mean others haven't seen it. Kay and his men often hang out with Feng Ling. If they were not men, they would have been discovered long ago, right? What the hell are you thinking about all day long? As soon as Qiao Fei finished speaking, the others glanced at each other and then glanced at Feng Ling and the others. They saw that Tam Lin Qing and Feng Ling were chatting and laughing together. They looked like brothers getting along with each other. Indeed, if they were really women, they should have been discovered long ago. A person could hide in the base for a year or 2, but it was impossible to hide for a long time. Could it be that the thing at that time really had something to do with Auntie Jelly? Then why did Auntie Jelly suddenly disappear in the canteen? Was it because she felt that the thing was seen by these young men and felt too embarrassed, so she left? But it didn't seem to make sense. But now they wanted to find Auntie Jelly to ask the truth, but they really couldn't contact her. But Qiao Fei was a drill master after all, and he wouldn't lie to them. "Got it, Brother Qiao, it's our fault," they said in a low voice. Qiao Fei nodded coldly. "Well, don't spread these irrelevant things around in the future. The recent rumors in 11 base are all from you, right? If there is really something wrong with Feng Ling, the higher-ups would have specially asked Feng Ling to investigate it. There is no need for you to do it, understand?" Yes. "Don't worry, it won't happen again." Qiao Fei withdrew his gaze from them and walked away, leaving the members of Team 3 with a doubtful and confused expression. The next day, Feng Ling left the base with the U.S. military, accompanied by Kay. No one knew why Feng Ling was suddenly taken away by the U.S. military, but everyone felt that it was not so simple for the U.S. military to take Feng Ling away. A member of the sniper team was invited away by the U.S. military, which had always been secretly displeased with the base. There must be something fishy about it, but no one dared to ask directly. After arriving at the place, Danny Ken arranged a good residence for Feng Ling. Feng Ling went in and saw the environment inside and directly left. "This is not a place where I should live. Where does Kay live? I'll go with him. Kay also lives in this building, but since we invited the 2 of you over, of course we can't let the 2 of you squeeze into the same room. The room he lives in is also not bad. Don't worry and stay here. I'll talk to the leader later and see how to arrange for you to exchange pointers with our sniper team, Danny Ken said as he opened the door again and gestured for her to enter. However, Feng Ling was determined not to enter. After a while, Kay jumped out of nowhere and suddenly came up the stairs. He waved at her from afar. Feng Ling, come here. My room is very big. It's even a suite. There are 2 beds. Let's live together. All right. Hearing that there were 2 beds, Feng Ling nodded without hesitation and walked straight to Kay, completely ignoring Danny Ken who had been dragging her in. Seeing that Kay had come to this floor, Danny Ken didn't know what to say. He leaned forward and said, haven't we arranged rooms for each of you? Brother Kay, do you often live together like this in the base? We're all men. What's wrong with living together? It's not the same bed. Kay took a look at him matter-of-factly. Even if we share the same bed, it's not a problem. Does everyone in the military team live alone? Do you have so many rooms? Don't you have dormitories? That's true. However, for outstanding members like you and little brother Feng Ling, we've always treated them very well. Aside from the generous bonuses, you'll also be given a good residence. There are many outstanding snipers in our sniper team over there. I'll find an opportunity to introduce you to them, Danny Ken said with a smile. That's right. We're just here to exchange pointers. We don't care about other things. Go ahead. Call us when you need us. Kay said and winked at Feng Ling. Let's go back to the room to make the bed. I see there are new bed sheets in it. Seeing that the 2 of them had left, Danny Ken stood where he was. The smile on his face gradually faded and then turned cold. He narrowed his eyes and turned back to glance at the room Feng Ling had specially arranged for her. With a displeased expression, he walked over and slammed the door with a ping sound. The next morning, just as Danny Ken had said, he arranged for them to spar with the military sniper team. It was a very simple technical exchange. So simple that Feng Ling and Kay could clearly see that they didn't mean it. They only used Type 81 automatic rifles and didn't even take out the military sniper rifles for them to exchange pointers. However, in addition to good performance and high accuracy, this Type 81 automatic rifle also had a small regret, which was that it was very heavy. It was heavier than the largest sniper rifle they had ever seen before. Kay didn't care. He was strong, but he was a little worried about Feng Ling. He suspected that they deliberately didn't take out the sniper rifles but deliberately took out this kind of thing to deliberately mock Feng Ling's weak body. However, Feng Ling's face was expressionless. She just looked at the confident expressions of the military snipers when they were shooting. She could see that each of them was also first class in strength and physical fitness. Boss Lee always talked about her physical fitness, which was actually very reasonable. When it was Feng Ling and Kay's turn, Kay went to the field first. Although it was a little heavy, it was not inferior to the elite military snipers. When Feng Ling was about to go to the field, Kay walked back from her side and whispered to her in a voice that only she could hear, "The weight of this gun is not right. I just tried other people's guns and they are lighter than ours. It seems that the butt of our Type 81 automatic rifles is filled with lead or sand. These idiots must have come to humiliate the people of 11 Base. Be careful." Hearing this, Feng Ling walked down calmly to the field. When she picked up the gun they handed to her, as Kay said, it was much heavier than she expected. However, they used the chest ring target, which was one of the common training events in the base. Chapter 9:17. When he finally realized what had happened, he saw that the center of the 5 targets in the field had been hit by the bullets, and the bullets had penetrated the targets behind, shooting down all the bullets that the soldiers had shot into them. Kay's eyes were also slightly watery. Sure enough, Boss and the drill masters had the best taste. Although the gun was very heavy, Feng Ling was still Feng Ling. Even if she was holding a 1,000-pound boulder in her hand, her aim was still better than that of ordinary people. Furthermore, she had fired a few shots in a split second without any hesitation. Furthermore, she was so accurate. The people standing closest to her were probably going to be deafened by the deafening sound. How could such a heavy gun be so fast and powerful? Feng Ling suddenly remembered that in the base, everyone was used to choosing light guns. Even if it was a sniper rifle, no one was willing to touch something that was too heavy, because they were afraid that it would be inconvenient to carry something too heavy on their back when they went out on a mission, and it would be too heavy. But at this moment she suddenly realized that Boss Lee had once commented on them when they were choosing their sniper rifles. Sure enough, we haven't experienced enough yet. So this was what he meant. Heavy guns were not necessarily a burden. On the contrary, perhaps at some times, only these heavier weapons could suppress the wind and various changes on the battlefield, and they were several times more stable than any light guns. She didn't expect that she would have such a harvest this time. The corners of Feng Ling's mouth curved up. When she put away the gun, even if the people in the field were unwilling to applaud, they still had to applaud for the sake of the peace with 11 base. Kay was even more excited and couldn't wait to rush forward and carry Feng Ling, this big baby, over. However, he kept in mind the look in Boss Lee's eyes that could devour people. Forget about hugging him. It was better to protect him well. After arriving at the military sniper team training camp, Kay followed Feng Ling wherever she went for 3 consecutive days. He even followed her when she went to the toilet. Fortunately, the suite they lived in had a bathroom in each bedroom, so they didn't need to go out. This was not 11 base. Even if they didn't need to train, they still had to avoid arousing suspicion. If they had nothing to do, they would rather eat instant noodles in their room than go out, let alone go to the cafeteria here to be watched and criticized behind their backs. On the morning of the 4th day, the military sniper team invited them to join them during the morning training, but during the training one of them accidentally bumped into a water training pool not far away. Even though Feng Ling was prepared, her lower body still fell into the water. Before her upper body touched the water, Kay quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her out. "Are you all right?" Feng Ling shook her head and turned to look at the group of people. She patted the water on her pants and asked in a voice that only Kay could hear, "Before leaving the base, didn't boss talk to you? How long did he say we have to stay here?" Kay took a look at her and whispered, 5 days. Hearing these words, Feng Ling immediately knew what to do. She decided not to argue with this group of military trash for the time being. Otherwise, the superficial peace between 11 base and the military would be broken sooner or later. At that time it would be really difficult to deal with them. She didn't know what would happen. She took out the cell phone from her trouser pocket and patted it in her hand. "My cell phone is wet." She rarely took her cell phone with her in the training camp of 11 base, but she always took it here. She didn't expect such a scene would happen. "Go back and change your clothes. Don't walk around. I'll clean them up here." Kay gave her a wink. Feng Ling nodded. Although her pants were wet and her upper body was fine, it was not appropriate for her to stand here in such a sorry state. She glanced coldly at the crowd and said in a low voice, "Just clean up a little. Don't go too far. Otherwise we won't be able to explain ourselves when we go back. Don't worry. I won't argue with them too much, but I'll find a chance to have fun." Kay said and shook his wrist as if he didn't care. His actions clearly showed that he was angry. Feng Ling knew that he was reliable, so she didn't care about him and walked back while patting her cell phone. After returning to her residence, she wiped the water on the cell phone, but the water inside probably couldn't evaporate for the time being. Now the screen was black and she didn't know if it could be used. Now the temperature in Los Angeles was very low. She fell into the water and came out, so her body was very cold, but she remembered Kay's words. She shouldn't be separated from him for too long, so she didn't plan to take a bath. After changing clothes, she went back to pick up the kettle in the room and boiled some hot water for herself to drink. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water, she turned around with the cup and suddenly stopped. She looked at the kettle on the table and then turned to take a look at Kay's room. Her eyelids twitched. Why were there 2 kettles? Wasn't there only 1 kettle in this room last night? Did someone come into this room today? And someone specially brought in a new kettle? She remembered Kay said that the fat commander above Danny Ken often used some dirty means to deal with the man he liked. Could it be? Kay was right. What kind of dirty means could it be? She abruptly put down the cup in her hand and was about to turn around to leave when she suddenly heard the sound of a door opening. The fat commander, who she had only occasionally passed by on the training ground these few days, walked in and looked at her with a smile on his face. "Where are you going, little Feng Ling?" Feng Ling got goosebumps all over her body because of his words. She looked at the fat commander calmly with her dark eyes and said indifferently, "Commander, if you need anything, you can call me and my partner to see you at any time. This is our private room. It doesn't seem appropriate for you to come here. You're so young, but you're so cautious." If I hadn't taken this opportunity to come here, I don't know how long my heart would be itching. The fat commander looked at the androgynous face in front of him that moved his heart at first sight, and his heart itched even more. He stared at Feng Ling, closed the door behind him and then casually locked it. Hearing the sound of the door being locked, Feng Ling's eyes narrowed slightly and her hands couldn't help clenching. She turned back and was about to pick up the cell phone on the table. 11 Base had a habit of quickly contacting the emergency contact person on the cell phone. As long as her hand was fast enough, she would definitely be able to inform Kay to come back. However, as soon as her hand reached back, she suddenly remembered that the cell phone was wet. Chapter 9:18. At this moment, the fat commander's cell phone rang. He seemed to be unhappy because of the interference of the ringtone. He had to turn off his cell phone later. Commander, I know you're a man who has tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. That Feng Ling is very guarded and skilled. I've specially put something in her water to ensure that you won't be hurt by this brat. After this is done, you know what to do, right? Don't worry, nothing will go wrong this time. He's just a member of the sniper team. I'll deal with 11 Base. Just don't kill him. On the phone, it was Daniken's voice. Hearing this, the fat commander's face became much better. When he looked up at the handsome little man whose cheeks were faintly blushing, he couldn't wait to pounce on him. Since you took the initiative to let me in, I'll enjoy it. I'll tell my superiors more about you. The fat commander hung up the phone, turned it off and threw it back into his trouser pocket. He looked at Feng Ling lustfully and his eyes became more presumptuous. When he saw Feng Ling shooting in 11 Base, although he had played with many men for so many years, it was the first time that he was so moved by a man. At that time, if this boy wasn't a member of 11 Base, he would definitely take him away. He didn't expect that when he pretended to be reserved, Daniken would specially bring him back and arrange him here. Looking at this handsome man whose eyes were full of wariness and coldness and whose complexion became more and more abnormal because of being drugged, the fat commander gave a very satisfied smile. This entire building had been sealed from the outside when he came in. Now even if Feng Ling wanted to escape, it would be difficult for him to do so. Feng Ling leaned forward slightly, but she quietly took half a step back. Danger. She sensed a very obvious danger. She had to leave immediately or she might not be able to escape. For so long she had been safe and sound in 11 Base because of her accurate premonition and observation skills, and her instinct to quickly react and avoid every time someone suspected her. However, her body swayed without warning at this moment. The alarm in her heart suddenly rang. Just as her feet stabilized, an indescribable restlessness and warmth began to quickly flow through her limbs and bones. There seemed to be a ball of fire burning in his lower abdomen and he almost fell down. Water. The water in the pot just now. It was rare that she didn't check to see if anyone had entered the room because of her restlessness and impatience. When she saw that it was the same kettle as last night, she directly used it. It seemed that there was really something wrong with that pot of water. Out of strength? I think the best sniper in your 11 Base is just SOSO. You still foolishly fell into the trap, didn't you? The fat commander approached with a sneer. Are you feverish? Do you really want to be pressed down on the bed and tortured? A chill ran down Feng Ling's spine. She instantly understood what he meant. Was this drug? That kind of drug? Feng Ling, who had been drugged, tried her best to stay sober, but when the fat commander stepped forward and grabbed her hair, her body staggered. She closed her eyes and did not struggle violently. She clenched her fists tightly in her sleeves and was abruptly pressed against the sofa by the fat commander. Her head was forced against the surface of the leather sofa, and the stuffy and cold temperature allowed her to barely stay sober. Her hand fumbled in the gap under the sofa. Since she and Kay moved in here, they had been very vigilant, especially Kay, who kept nagging that there was something wrong with Daniken and the fat commander and they had to be careful, so the two of them secretly prepared some things everywhere in this room. Although there were not many, Kay happened to hide a sharp dagger in the innermost side of the leather cushion of the sofa. At that time, although Feng Ling didn't intervene when Kay hid these things, she only glanced at them from the side. Even if it was just a glance, she could remember where everything was placed and which were the tools she could use to defend herself at any time. For example, there was a dagger under the sofa, a wooden stick under the coffee table, an emergency knife under the bed, and even though guns were not allowed in this room, there were a few fountain pens in the study room next door. The tips of the fountain pens were very sharp and they were not capped. They were just thrown into the shoe cabinet by the door. There was also a small paper knife that Feng Ling borrowed when she went to the office here yesterday afternoon to write some documents. Little beauty, I haven't seen a man as beautiful as you. The fat commander pressed her shoulder hard with one hand. Seeing that she had no strength, he smiled as if he was about to succeed and lowered his head to kiss her on the cheek. The moment he lowered his head, Feng Ling suddenly turned her head away and trembled all over as if she was so angry that she couldn't stop trembling. Don't be afraid. I will love you well. You must not know that there can be such an ecstasy between men. It's even more wonderful than doing that kind of thing with a woman. I will teach you well. As soon as he finished speaking, the fat commander suddenly exerted force, and the collar of Feng Ling's black combat uniform was immediately pulled open. His fat hands were about to reach for her collar. Feng Ling bit down hard on her lower lip. Even if she bit it until it bled, she still didn't let go. Pain could make her more clear-headed and not easily succumb to this disgusting drug effect. She was willing to risk her life and be ruthless. Since she could remember, she had lived in a wolf's cave and was used to seeing wild beasts tearing and slaughtering each other for a mouthful of food. She had seen the blood on the ground and the life and death fights between animals. She grew up drinking wolf's milk and was full of wolf nature. She was taken away when she was 5 years old, but she was trained in the mafia to learn self-protection and to hide herself. In order to survive, she suppressed all her wolf nature and temper. At the age of 12, she was forced to be sent to an orphanage. Those people gave her tranquilizers every day to guard against her. At the age of 13, she entered 11 base and finally found the life she wanted and the place she wanted to live. She also suppressed the bloodthirst and coldness in her nature. She just wanted to live a good life like a human being with hot food to eat and a warm bed to live in. That was all. But obviously, sometimes people were cold-blooded, more terrible, and deserved to die than wolves. Chapter 9:19. From the beginning, Feng Ling didn't waste any strength to struggle. The moment she clenched the dagger in her hand, she abruptly turned over, and before the fat commander could react, she forcefully stabbed the dagger at the hand that was pressing her shoulder with all her strength. Ah! The sharp dagger instantly pierced into the back of the fat commander's hand. He screamed in pain and hurriedly let go. Feng Ling supported herself against the edge of the sofa and stood up. Due to the effects of the drug, her feet were unsteady, but she abruptly turned her eyes. Her eyes, which were bloodshot from the drug and anger, were filled with killing intent. She did not give him any time to struggle or retreat. When he held his hand tightly, she abruptly stepped forward and kicked him to the ground. She stepped hard on his round stomach and slapped him hard in the face. Without saying a word, she directly pressed the dagger against the main artery of his neck. The fat commander didn't expect that after being drugged, she could still be so agile and swift. She looked like a thin and powerless boy. The fat commander's hand was in excruciating pain, and because of the coldness on his neck and the bloodthirsty killing intent in Feng Ling's eyes, he trembled all over and the shock in his eyes turned into fear. How dare you? How dare you hurt me? Do you know who I am? Feng Ling looked at him with a sneer. If you say another word of nonsense, no matter who you are, you will be killed by my knife. Do you think I will be afraid? To deal with a scum like you, I'll die with you. Die with me. You represent 11 base. If you dare to make trouble here, believe it or not, the people above will report you and make your entire 11 base suffer. The fat commander's hand that was stabbed kept trembling in pain. His hand was bleeding, but his eyes were still full of arrogance. He forcibly suppressed all his fear and didn't believe that this boy really dared to go against the military. Hearing the words 11 base, Feng Ling's murderous eyes gradually recovered a trace of calmness, but only a little. At this time there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. Noticing that Feng Ling hadn't come back for so long, Kay was afraid that something had happened. After all, it was the first time that she had left his sight for more than 10 minutes. When he rushed back, he saw that someone was guarding this building. Noticing that something was wrong, he knocked them unconscious, rushed in and kicked the door open. The moment she entered the door, she saw this scene. The fat commander was lying on the ground, his hands covered in blood. Feng Ling pressed the fat commander down with bloodshot eyes. She held a blood-stained dagger against his neck. If she used a little more strength, she would be able to kill him. Feng Ling, what are you doing? Even if he remembered to protect Feng Ling, this was, after all, a military area. If she dared to attack the commander here, none of them would be able to leave and 11 base would definitely be implicated. Before he came back, he had called Boss Lee. Boss Lee was on a mission 10 kilometers away with a group of elites from the base. He had planned to come here directly after the mission, so he picked them up 5 days earlier than expected. After telling Boss Lee the situation, he hung up the phone. Now Boss Lee hadn't arrived yet. Nothing must happen to him. Feng Ling clutched the fat commander's collar tightly and pressed the dagger against his neck. Her eyes were cold and she said word by word with hatred, "They drugged me." Kay's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he suddenly turned to look at the kettle next to him. Understanding what she meant, he frowned. But it seemed that Feng Ling didn't suffer a big loss. Even if he had the urge to kill the scum, he had to bear it for the sake of the overall situation. And it seemed that the fat commander's hand was also hurt by Feng Ling. He hurriedly walked over and pulled Feng Ling up. Feng Ling didn't get up, so Kay pressed her shoulder hard and warned in a low voice, "Boss will be here soon. If there is any dispute, let's talk to Boss. Don't solve it in this way or it will be very difficult." With that, he lowered his voice and whispered to her ear, "You have hurt the commander. Even if they were dirty first, this is the way of the world. His identity and status don't allow you to do anything too outrageous. Listen to me. Let's wait for Boss to come and solve it." Feng Ling still didn't move, staring coldly at the fat commander who was lying on the ground but was smiling smugly at this time. He knew that they didn't dare to do anything for the sake of the overall situation. Feng Ling clenched his collar even more tightly. "I'm on the same side as you. Boss asked me to protect you, but we are 11 bases people after all. Feng Ling, you will destroy 11 base." The bloodthirsty light in Feng Ling's eyes gradually faded. She suddenly withdrew the dagger and then let go of the man on the ground. At the same time, she was pulled up by Kay and staggered a step back. She clenched the dagger in her hand but didn't do anything again. She just looked coldly at the fat commander who stood up with one hand on the ground. She didn't want to say a word and suppressed the fiery restlessness and the urge to kill in her body. Fearing that she couldn't control herself, she suddenly turned around and was about to walk out. Seeing her strange look, Kay didn't know how serious the drug these bastards gave her was. He frowned and was about to go out with her. "Too good for nothings. Do you really think you can escape from this place?" The fat commander looked at Kay, who didn't dare to do anything to him, and Feng Ling couldn't hold on for long because of the drug in her body. After all, he was a man. His face was hurt and his hand was stabbed. Even if he was injured, he couldn't stand it. Bang! Feng Ling's head was abruptly pressed down by the fat commander, who suddenly walked over quickly. She was slammed against the wall by the door, and in an instant warm crimson liquid flowed down her forehead and stained the wall. Kay's eyes widened. "Damn it! What the hell are you doing?" He stepped forward, dragged the fat commander away and was about to help Feng Ling up, when the fat commander suddenly took out a gun from his waist and pointed it at the back of Kay's head. Kay paused and stood still, looking worriedly at Feng Ling, who was leaning against the wall and hadn't moved for a long time because of the violent impact on her head. He could only see blood flowing down her forehead. Kay clenched his hands into fists. Chapter 9:20. Feng Ling. Suddenly roared, kicked back hard, kicked the gun out of the fat commander's hand, took it back and pointed the muzzle at the fat commander's forehead. The fat commander grabbed Feng Ling's hair tightly. When Feng Ling was pressed against the bloody wall without any signs of struggling, he sneered and looked at A, who was pointing a gun at him. "Do you dare to shoot?" A's eyes were also filled with coldness and ruthlessness. "Let go of her. The base will solve everything rationally with you. It won't do you any good in this way." "Let go?" The fat commander sneered. Not only did he not let go of her, but he pressed Feng Ling's head against the wall again and again, roaring violently, "Shameless brat. It's his honor that I like him today. If I hadn't expected that you would hide a dagger here, he would have been begging for sex under me now." Feng Ling had lost a lot of blood. Her head seemed to be smashed into pieces by the impact. "Ah!" The scream stopped abruptly as the blood spurted out of his neck. The fat commander stared in disbelief at Feng Ling, who dared to kill him. His desire to survive made him open his mouth tremblingly, but as more and more blood flowed from his neck, He couldn't breathe and fell heavily back to the ground. He struggled desperately on the ground for a long time because of the pain and suffocation. After 3 or 4 minutes he fell to the ground, twitching all over, and blood flowed all over the ground. He fell to the ground and completely motionless. The whole room suddenly became silent with the disgusting smell of blood. Feng Ling's forehead was still bleeding, and so was the dagger in her hand. A stood aside, slowly put down the gun and looked at the fat commander on the ground. Without checking his breath, he knew that he was dead. This knife was very accurate. Feng Ling had always been very proficient in the acupoints and structure of the human body. She had planned to kill him with this knife without any hesitation. Even though the fat commander had fallen to the ground and blood was gushing out of his neck like water from a high-pressure water gun, the fat commander still couldn't help but feel his blood gushing out. Feng Ling, who was sprayed with blood, looked coldly at the dead man on the ground as if she had just come out of hell. Then she didn't look at A but turned to walk out. A came to his senses and suddenly clenched the gun. At this point he could only protect Feng Ling first. He couldn't care less about other things. He quickly chased after her, only to see that several people from the military had already rushed over. However, before they could even rush up the stairs, Feng Ling had already cut their throats in the blink of an eye. She cut all the way down without even blinking. In an instant the stairs were filled with pools of blood. Looking at Feng Ling, who stepped down the stairs step by step with numb eyes, I suddenly found that Feng Ling, who had always been silent and calm, was different from what he had imagined. Feng Ling was not a gentle little cutie. She just hid her most violent side perfectly and would never show such a cold-blooded face to others. He didn't know what kind of past Feng Ling had. He only knew that after staying in the base for so many years, the current Feng Ling had completely changed his understanding of her. But no matter how powerful she was, it was impossible for her to kill her way out. There were military snipers everywhere. At any time, someone could fire a shot from a window that they didn't know about and she would die on the spot. Feng Ling quickly chased after her, but the people who surrounded her outside all dared not approach her because of Feng Ling's terrible killing intent and could only point their guns at her. He also pointed his gun at them and stood behind Feng Ling to protect her all the way out. Just when there were snipers lurking on the nearby building and pointing their guns at the two of them. Suddenly, a black Hummer broke through the defense line set by the military and drove in unimpeded. The speed of the black Hummer was so fast that it caught people off guard. They had to step back to make way for it. When the Hummer was only 100 meters away from Feng Ling and A, and everyone thought that the car was going to hit them, Feng Ling's eyes were still cold and she didn't show any intention of avoiding it. Or rather, her eyes were not focused at all. There was only obvious killing intent. Whoever dared to come close, she dared to kill them. The tall and cool car suddenly stopped, and several members in the elite combat uniforms of the base jumped out of the car and surrounded both sides of the car. At the same time, they raised their guns and quickly protected Feng Ling and A in the middle, forming a large circle and a small circle. The cold wind was biting cold. The door of the driver's seat opened. Li Nanheng got out of the car, slammed the door and walked toward them expressionlessly. He walked straight to Feng Ling and looked at Feng Ling, who was white and clean in the base, but now she was covered with blood and looked embarrassed. There seemed to be some kind of wolf in her eyes that he had never seen before, and her eyes almost lost focus. He narrowed his eyes coldly. What happened? Feng Ling didn't speak but just looked at him. She still hadn't regained her senses and just didn't attack them like she did with Usher. Boss, A said in a low voice behind him. We killed someone. A quickly glanced at him. There was no blood on his body, but the dagger on Feng Ling's body and hand was clear evidence of murder. He immediately knew that the "we" in A's mouth was probably only Feng Ling. Who did you kill? Li Nanheng was still looking at Feng Ling. He answered, Commander. Even when he heard that the person who was killed was the commander, Li Nanheng didn't frown but asked coldly, why? A glanced at Feng Ling, who was covered in blood. These bastards drugged Feng Ling. She was almost. Li Nanheng's ink-black eyes were instantly filled with a trace of coldness. He looked coldly at Feng Ling's torn coat and collar and was about to pull out the dagger in her hand, but Feng Ling instantly took a step back with bloodshot eyes and avoided his hand. Li Nanheng looked at her defensive movements and then at her completely different expression. To prevent her from hurting herself, he said indifferently, Feng Ling, give me the knife. Asking for monthly votes. Chapter 921. Seeing that she didn't move, Li Nanheng asked coldly, "Feng Ling, who am I?" She didn't answer, but it was clear that if she hadn't recognized him as Li Nanheng, she would have also tried to kill him. She recognized him, but she obviously didn't want to. Li Nanheng stared at her and his eyes suddenly turned cold. Feng Ling didn't move. Li Nanheng reached out again. Instead of grabbing the knife, he reached out to her. "I'm here. Don't be afraid. Give me the knife first, En." It was not difficult to see that she was greatly stimulated. Her eyes were full of scarlet and distrust for everyone, including him. "You've already killed someone. Aren't you calm enough?" Li Nanheng said coldly. "If you haven't calmed down, go back to the car and calm down alone. Give me the knife. I'll deal with it." Feng Ling held the knife in her hand tightly, and the wariness in her eyes intensified. Li Nanheng looked at her. Seeing that she still refused to take a step forward, he simply approached her. When the wariness in her eyes increased sharply, he said indifferently, "I won't hurt you. Now that such a situation has happened, I won't blame you for what you did, and I can understand that you just wanted to protect yourself. Leave it to me, but you must give me the knife first. You can't carry a sharp weapon with you. Otherwise, in such an irrational situation, even if she didn't kill someone, she was likely to hurt herself." Feng Ling's eyes flickered and she looked at him doubtfully. Seeing a sign of hesitation in her eyes, Li Nanheng approached again and signaled her to give him the knife with his eyes. Just as Feng Ling raised her hand and was about to put the knife into his hand, she suddenly paused and regretted it. She was about to withdraw her hand, but Li Nanheng suddenly took this opportunity to hold her wrist and twisted it hard, and the knife in her hand instantly fell to the ground. Alarm bells rang in her heart. She hurriedly struggled to fight back, but the man's gaze turned cold. Under her irrational struggle, he raised his hand and hit the most vulnerable part of her neck. In an instant, the girl, covered in blood and in a sorry state, fell weakly into his arms. Seeing that Feng Ling was knocked unconscious by Boss Li, A was shocked. "Boss, you..." Li Nanheng held the person in his arms and casually took off his coat to cover her. He looked at her coldly. "Help her into the car and wait for me in the car." Ah hurriedly went to pick up Feng Ling, who had lost consciousness, and turned to look at him. Li Nanheng had already ordered the others to follow him in. Then 3 more cars from the base rushed in, and more than a dozen people got out of the cars to protect Ah and Feng Ling. Until Ah safely sent Feng Ling into the car, no one could approach. As soon as Li Nanheng walked in, he saw Danny Ken and the other military leaders surrounding the room with shocked expressions. From afar he could smell the thick stench of blood wafting from the room. Danny Ken and the others were indeed very shocked, and this shock was not fake. No one could have expected that handing over a brat from the base to the commander with the intention of showing filial respect to the commander would end up taking his life. As a result, this was equivalent to ruining the future of a large group of people. After all, even if the blame was on the base, they, as the commander's subordinates, had many private connections with him. Now that the commander was dead, they did not know what to do in the future. "Boss." One of the elites from the base followed behind him and said in a low voice, "Earlier I saw several people leave. From their gaze they seem to be planning to do something, but I don't know what exactly they are going to do." Li Nanheng glanced at the corner of the corridor. "Follow them. They are probably going to destroy the surveillance footage. Bring the surveillance footage over. Don't give them a chance to do so." The people behind him nodded. In order to not attract too much attention, they acted alone. "Mr. Li." Danny Ken turned back to see the expressionless Li Nanheng walking in. He did not expect Li Nanheng to come at a time like this. Instantly, he could not contain his agitation and rushed forward to reason with him. However, Li Nanheng coldly glanced at him. "Where is he?" "Inside." Danny Ken said angrily. "Your subordinates are really audacious. They even dared to kill our commander. Is she not afraid that the entire military will put a bounty on her? Or is she relying on the protection of the higher-ups to commit murder? Whether it is murder or reasonable self-defense, we can only make a conclusion after we understand the truth. Right now your anxious expression shows that you are feeling guilty. What are you trying to hide?" Li Nanheng coldly glanced at him. "Get out of the way." Daniken's originally enraged expression froze for a moment. Then he became even more enraged. His gaze was cold and vicious. "Let me tell you, the commander's life is enough to destroy your entire base. Even at this time you still dare to spout nonsense here. The commander has already been killed by you. Do you think she can grow wings on her back and fly out of the military base? The surrounding people looked at Li Nanheng's handsome and cold face. Although they could not tell what he was thinking, they instinctively felt that since this person dared to walk in, he was definitely more dangerous than the brat who had killed earlier. The crowd all took a step back. Danny Ken was still enraged. He pointed at the door behind him that reeked of blood and said coldly and angrily, "Let me tell you, calling your people over to the military base is already showing respect to your base. The results of the competition have yet to be decided. You've only been here for a few days, yet you dare to kill someone in the military base. If Feng Ling and A can walk out of here alive today, my name will fall." Before he could finish his words, he was pushed aside by the people behind Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng did not even bother to look at him. After the obstacle before him was removed, he directly walked in. Danny Ken staggered from the push and almost slammed into the wall. He was filled with disbelief and anger as he turned to look at Li Nanheng and the elite members of the base behind him. He cursed under his breath and hurriedly followed them in. Danny Ken looked at the imposing and noble figure standing before the corpse of the fat commander and immediately approached with large strides. "Mr. Li, if you're a reasonable person, then let's reason with each other. No matter what happens, we can't kill people in the military base. Besides, the base and the military base have always been very friendly with each other. We don't wish for any friction to occur between us. But now your subordinates have killed someone in our territory. Tell me, what should we do? The deceased is our commander with the highest authority. This matter will soon reach the upper echelons. Do you think you can suppress them all by yourself?" Chapter 922. Whether or not I have to forcefully suppress this matter is another matter. Li Nanheng looked at the fat commander's corpse on the ground. He looked at the wound on the back of his hand and the fatal cut on his neck. His gaze was cold and his voice was cold. "No matter what happens, this Li doesn't think so. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I know my subordinates very well. For things to develop to such a vicious end, there must be an even more vicious premise that they can't bear." Speaking up to here, the man turned his eyes. His handsome face swept indifferently over the furniture and decorations in the surroundings. He then looked at the obvious bloodstain on the wall by the door. Everyone stopped what they were doing because of his gaze, including Danny Ken. When he heard that he intended to investigate the cause of the incident, his expression also froze. "This Li is right here. If you want to investigate who is responsible, find me directly." Li Nanheng stood there as though there was no one else around. His eyes examined the other wounds on the fat commander's body. Finally, he furrowed his brows coldly. To be killed by Feng Ling with a single stab, to provoke Feng Ling to the point where she almost lost her rationality. The treatment she suffered earlier was definitely not as simple as being drugged. She knew how to restrain her emotions too well. There must be a reason for her to be provoked to such an extent. Li Nanheng turned his head and swept another glance at the bloodstain on the wall. The bloodstain seemed to be caused by someone's head being knocked against the wall. He recalled the blood on Feng Ling's forehead earlier. His gaze abruptly turned coldly to Danny Ken, whose eyes were currently somewhat evasive. "If there is a reason for this matter and the reason lies with your military, then we will do as you say. We will reason with reason and evidence. We will carefully investigate just what exactly is the reason for provoking these two people who have always been quiet and never stirring up trouble in our base to such an extent. If the entire reason lies with my people, don't worry, this Li will definitely not let them off lightly." Daniken's expression was cold. "What you mean is, even if the problem lies with your two subordinates, you don't intend to leave them here for us to deal with, or do you intend to take them away? Feng Ling and A are both members of my base. Since they have committed crimes, I should be the one to personally bring them to surrender or be punished. I'll deal with them as they should. Otherwise, you should tell the whole truth no matter where you are. You definitely can't let those who have done wrong go, but from your attitude it seems like you want to keep them here. What, you want to execute them in a military area?" Li Nanheng's tone was neither high nor low, and there was not the slightest hint of arrogance. However, his aura was not weak either. His attitude was completely calm and no one could find any fault with it. Instead, it seemed that Danny Ken was a little too angry and impatient. The contrast between true guilt and calmness couldn't be more obvious. How do you want to investigate the truth? Now our commander is dead here and your men are planning to charge out unscathed. The truth is right before our eyes. Wrong, I'm afraid you've misunderstood the words completely unscathed. Li Nanheng glanced at him mildly. The wound on Feng Ling's head and the fact that he seems to have been drugged and is in a delirious state, is this completely unharmed? Danny Ken was instantly speechless. Although the other members of the military who didn't understand the situation were on their side. When they heard this, the room fell silent for half a minute. Everyone looked at each other, their expressions subtle. Could it be that the commander had his eyes on the people of the base? Did he end up like this because of their resistance? If this was truly the reason, and if the person in charge of the base insisted on investigating, then the outcome of this matter was really hard to say. In an instant no one dared to speak. Instead they all secretly glanced toward Danny Ken. Daniken's expression was ugly as well. He had never imagined that offering Feng Ling to the commander would end up costing the commander's life. He was already unable to bear the consequences. If this matter was discovered, his future would be completely ruined. Seeing his clearly unstable expression, Li Nanheng stood there and narrowed his eyes dangerously. The easiest way to deal with this kind of sudden murder scene without any warning or motive is to check the surveillance footage and see what exactly happened in this room in the past half an hour. Danny Ken instantly sneered coldly. You think you can check the surveillance footage just because you want to? This room is something that our military very sincerely allowed Feng Ling and Ah to stay in. Since they are staying here, how could we possibly place surveillance footage in this room? Not only will this appear very insincere, it will also violate the privacy of your base members. Even if you go to the surveillance room, it will be the same. They won't be able to take out the surveillance footage in this room. Is that so? Li Nanheng curved his lips and sneered. Danny Ken stood there and continued to put on an act. He sighed and said, although we also wish to know what exactly happened in this room, we can't conclude that Feng Ling was drugged just based on a few words of yours, Mr. Li. You said that he was injured, but I think it's possible that our commander injured him in self-defense. Right now your base has no evidence and you're still trying to deny it to a dead person. The person is lying right in front of you. How else do you want to deny it? Boss. All of a sudden the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. An elite member of the base who had rushed to the military surveillance room rushed in with a disc in his hand. When no one expected him to do so, he wrapped up the laptop he had just taken from the car, opened it and inserted the disc into it. Danny Ken saw this action and immediately turned to look at the few people who had also rushed in. He saw that they were the people he had sent to destroy the surveillance footage. From their expressions, it was clear that the base's people had rushed in first. Just as he was about to speak, he discovered that the base's people had actually called over a leader who was even more powerful than the commander. The leader had just arrived after hearing the news. When he saw the corpse on the ground, he immediately frowned. At the same time, he turned to look at Li Nanheng's cold expression and the surveillance footage that was being played on the laptop. The computer screen instantly displayed the high-definition surveillance footage. However, it was clear that Feng Ling and Ah both knew that there might be surveillance footage in this room. Thus, when they entered the door to change, they had brought their clothes into the bedroom to change and were not captured. And the entire incident happened in the living room that was under surveillance. From when Feng Ling changed her clothes and entered the room to drink water, to when she noticed that the water was strange and kept checking the water bottle in her hand, to when the fat commander suddenly barged in, to when the two of them got into a verbal argument, to when Feng Ling staggered unsteadily and the fat commander suddenly pounced on her and pressed her down on the sofa. Chapter 923. Following that, scene after scene of what had just happened in this room unfolded before everyone's eyes. It included Feng Ling's agitated attempt to kill the commander, only to be stopped by A who had rushed in. Then Feng Ling gave up on killing him and turned to leave, only to be grabbed by the commander's hair and slammed against the wall. Finally, the fat commander grabbed Feng Ling's head with one hand and pointed his gun at A's head with the other. Such a scene caused Daniken's expression to freeze. He turned to look at the leader who had watched the entire scene. He saw the leader's furrowed brows and his face instantly turned ashen. Feng Ling, who had maintained her rationality and was planning to leave, was completely enraged by the fat commander. She turned back and slashed his neck without hesitation. All of a sudden, No one knew why, but the air in the room seemed to have suddenly frozen. Daniken turned to look at Li Nanheng. That handsome and extraordinary face was covered with an unprecedented coldness. The man's voice was also frighteningly low. He enunciated each word, causing one's heart to tremble. Mr. Daniken, the truth is right here. It is still unclear who drugged Feng Ling, but from the surveillance footage it can be seen that after he was initially bullied and provoked, he did not do anything, nor did he make any aggressive defensive movements. However, the commander continued to pester him and used such force to smash his skull open to injure him. Although we couldn't hear what was going on, it was clear that the commander had said a lot to infuriate Feng Ling and a Do who had maintained their calm throughout. Yet they still did not make a move. In the end, why did my men choose to offend the military to kill him? I believe that Mr. Daniken knows the truth better than I do. What exactly happened? Wasn't Feng Ling the sniper sent by the base for a friendly match? How could something like this happen? The military leader's confusion at the start turned to rage, causing Daniken's face to gradually turn pale. He didn't expect the situation to develop to this point. When he saw that something had happened, he thought that he could just send someone to destroy the evidence, but he didn't expect Li Nanheng to be so shrewd. He immediately sent someone to stop the surveillance. At this point, Li Nanheng had clearly placed all the blame on him after the death of the fat commander. Daniken simply laughed it off and said, "Leader, you also know that the commander likes men. Back then he used the condition of demoting me to force me to help him arrange things for Feng Ling. He wanted to settle this little brother Feng Ling. I was really hindered by the commander's authority, so I cooperated with him and helped him purge the people here. I also helped him arrange the entire process of Feng Ling returning to his room alone and put some drugs in the kettle. But I was really forced. The commander is so many ranks higher than me. I really couldn't do anything about his orders." The military leader instantly looked at him coldly. Before he could speak, Li Nanheng suddenly chuckled. Then Li Nanheng walked toward Daniken. He reached out and grabbed Daniken by the collar. His eyes were so cold that they could freeze people to death. "Who do you think you are? How dare you use such a despicable method to drug my men? And you even used my men to curry favor with your superiors? Mr. Li, let's talk this out." The evidence was right in front of him and the military leader was also present. Daniken couldn't explain himself even if he wanted to. He could only quickly show his weakness. The one who was even more enraged was the military leader. They had always been at odds with the base and the United Nations had always been suppressing them. They never expected that their own men would dare to use such a method to challenge the dignity and authority of the base. Right now, sacrificing a commander was not important. What was important was that someone from the base had killed someone here. This matter could not be covered up, and the reason for the murder was actually such a filthy and disgusting business. Right now, Daniken could only place all his hopes on the military leader. He hurriedly said, "I will investigate this matter thoroughly. I can't hear anything from the surveillance cameras. I can only see that little brother Feng was stubborn and refused to comply." The commander said that it had been a long time since he met such a fair and beautiful young man and he wanted him. However, I can't be sure what the commander said to agitate him. I was also forced to do this. Give me a chance. I will definitely investigate this matter thoroughly. He's already dead. How are you going to investigate? The military leader angrily rebuked. Li Nanheng paid no heed to his words. He casually raised his hand and called out to a newcomer, "You tell me what exactly happened?" The newcomer did not expect the boss of the base to call out his name. As a newcomer, he didn't understand many things and was timid. Seeing that something had happened to Daniken, he did not dare to side with him. He directly said, "I'm not too sure either." However, Daniken is indeed very close to the commander. He would often pick out good-looking men from among us newcomers and send them over to the commander. However, there doesn't seem to be any particularly fair and beautiful men in this batch, so the commander has always looked down on them. His temper has always been very bad. However, I heard that Daniken has indeed been working very hard to satisfy the commander's desires. The newcomer forced himself to finish speaking because he realized that with every word he said, Daniken's gaze would turn colder. Li Nanheng's icy eyes turned toward him at the same time. It was as though he would freeze to death in the next second. Li Nanheng did not waste any words with anyone. He abruptly grabbed Daniken's collar and pressed him against the fat commander's corpse. The Li family had several generations of military background. Their way of doing things had never been gentle. Right now, the man's expression was as cold and ruthless as iron. He did not show the slightest bit of mercy. In the beginning, you brought my men here under the pretext of exchanging pointers and demonstrations. In reality, your goal was to present them to your commander, N. Such a Li Nanheng was simply too frightening. His usual indifference was gone. Instead, his eyes were filled with a bloodthirsty coldness. Especially when he saw Feng Ling's clothes being torn apart and how her head was slammed against the wall time and time again, she did not move at all. His hands were incomparably vicious. Daniken's entire body was trembling. Right now, the military leader was watching by the side but did not make a sound. Clearly, because Li Nanheng was present, everyone had seen the surveillance footage and could not deny it. There was also no way to destroy the evidence. The two sides were evenly matched. Now that such a thing had happened and the evidence was found, the military would not be able to obtain any benefits. Instead, they would suffer a huge loss in public opinion. Chapter 924. Thus, the leader would definitely not protect him right now. Daniken did not expect Li Nanheng to appear at such a timely moment despite being so busy. The heavens really wanted him dead. Even the commander's skills are so poor. You can't even compare to a newbie in the sniper team. You want to touch my men? Are you even worthy? Li Nanheng lowered his waist, his voice extremely cold. The commander died a worthy death. If you're loyal to your master, why don't you accompany him? Daniken trembled all over, but no matter how he struggled, his body was still firmly pressed against the fat commander's body that had yet to completely cool down. The thick scent of blood made him nauseous, and the fear in his heart made him unable to care about anything else. He struggled to turn to the leader who had been frowning silently by the door. "Save me." The leader hesitated for a moment before saying, "Mr. Li, this is a dispute between 11 Base and the military. Since you're already here, we'll first send the commander's body to the forensic doctor. As for other matters, out of respect for Mr. Li and 11 Base, why don't we move to a clean place to discuss it? Right now, no matter what the cause is, someone has already died and the person who died is our military commander. This matter cannot be so easily determined. We still need more time. Of course there is no right or wrong. It is only self-defense," Li Nanheng replied coldly. Everyone in the room did not dare to make a sound. The leader frowned at Li Nanheng's reasonable and clear attitude that he would not allow Feng Ling to bear the responsibility for the murder. "But our commander was killed by a member of your base just like that. Are we just going to let this matter rest? Do you think it is so simple to kill someone in a military base?" Li Nanheng did not turn back. He continued to watch Daniken struggle against the fat commander's body. His military boots pressed against his back even harder, causing Daniken's entire face to turn pale from the pain. Drugging someone is already not simple. Naturally, killing someone is even more so. This Li cannot absolve himself from the blame for such a serious matter. But since we must pursue this matter, we might as well pursue it to the end. With that, Li Nanheng tossed the body to the ground. Those words, without the slightest warmth, caused Daniken's entire body to stiffen. His gaze wavered, his face still pressed against the fat commander's corpse. He lay there limply, unable to get up for a long time, his face frighteningly pale. What Li Nanheng meant was that not only would he not deliberately hide the fact that Feng Ling killed people, but he was also happy to cooperate with them to continue to blow up this matter. In the end, the so-called investigation to the end was to find out all the truth, including many things that had been hidden within the military for so many years. If they really wanted to be investigated, they might all be brought out. No matter how one looked at it, the military would be the one to suffer in the end. Even if 11 Base didn't gain any advantage in this matter, the military wouldn't have it easy either. Neither side would have a good time. Daniken knew that he was done for. Now that the leader was looking at him with a cold expression, he knew that he was done for. Li Nanheng didn't need to say anything. Just because Li Nanheng said that he would pursue this matter to the end, it was destined that the leader would choose to sacrifice the commander to suppress the whole matter, and most likely he would not pursue 11 Base's responsibility. At the same time, Li Nanheng clicked on the computer twice, and the scene of Feng Ling killing the commander slowed down. In the slow-motion scene, Feng Ling's face was covered in blood, and the wound on her head was obvious. However, her speed was so fast that it left everyone speechless. Furthermore, she had accurately slit his throat. It was a simple yet fatal stab. At this moment, this stab showed that when her head was slammed against the wall, she was truly enduring and did not even struggle. However, in the end, it was the fat commander who brought about his own death, forcing the person who had endured to the extreme to the point where she could no longer endure. Looking at this kind of hand speed and such precise control over all the organs of the human body, every single person present, regardless of whether they were members of the military or the elites of 11 Base, was stunned. What followed was an uproar of disbelief. Who would have thought that a new member of the sniper team who had just joined their base for a few years would have such beautiful skills? Even this kind of hand speed that was impossible for ordinary humans to achieve was so easy for her. This kind of speed was as though she was born with the sharpness and speed of a certain wolf. No one could compare to her. Everyone instantly fell silent. Li Nanheng appeared to be someone who cherished talent. If his subordinates were wronged, he would definitely not sit idly by. Right now, the person who was wronged was the member with the most potential in 11 Base's sniper team. It was reasonable for him to protect her with all his might. After watching the slow-motion scene, Li Nanheng strode out. No one dared to block his extremely cold back. Not to mention Danny Ken, who was on the ground. Even the leader standing by the door paled slightly. He then turned to look at the corpse on the ground. Thinking about how this new member of 11 Base was already so terrifying, if there was a day when the military really clashed with 11 Base, it was really uncertain who would emerge victorious. With the current situation of the United Nations unclear, the military could not act on their own. If they really clashed with 11 Base directly, especially Li Nanheng. The Li family behind him seemed to have broken away from the military's jurisdiction and was doing business outside, but regardless of whether it was business or political power, the Li family was still in their hands. It was said that the Li family even had many connections with the military through marriage. If the Li and Feng families joined together, it would definitely have a significant impact on the American business circle. It would also be a considerable blow to the military. On this point, if Danny Ken and the commander had not been blinded by their own selfishness, they definitely would not have dared to act against the people of 11 Base like this. Right now, it was not about the members of 11 Base killing people here. They could only use the fact that the commander was already dead to appease 11 Base's anger. Otherwise, everything would be very difficult. And that surveillance video just now. Not only would Li Nanheng be angry, even he would be angry. What was wrong with their brains? Usually, if they liked someone in the military, if they could really convince them, they could do whatever they wanted. But now, these two idiots actually extended their hands to the 11 Base that they could not afford to provoke. Wasn't this causing trouble for the military for no reason? No one spoke in the corridor. Li Nanheng's expression was cold and his footsteps were slow. He walked forward expressionlessly in front of every member of the military who had their guns pointed at him. The several elite team members following behind him were also fearless. Even if these people were given 100 guts, they would definitely not dare to open fire. They stood by the side and wanted to use their connections to intimidate others. Did they not know how guilty their master was right now? If they dared to open fire on them, no one would be able to bear the responsibility. Chapter 925. Walking out of the building, they returned to where the Hummer was parked. A lot of people had already gathered around them. The military members who had been pointing their guns at the Hummer had been silently confronting the elite team of the base, who had also raised their guns in response for a long time. Seeing that the black Hummer Feng Ling was sitting in was surrounded by layers of military, Li Nanheng's straight back was like a pine tree in the mountains, making people feel no warmth at all. His eyes were dangerously cold. He slowly narrowed his eyes, which were as deep as an icy pond. "Boss." When the elite team member saw that he had returned, he quickly walked to his side and whispered, "These people don't intend to let us go." "How is Feng Ling?" Li Nanheng asked in a low voice. "I'm not sure. Kay hasn't come out since he helped Feng Ling into the car. He probably hasn't woken up yet." Just as the elite squad members were about to say something, the incomparably cold and noble man in front of them strode into the crowd of armed men and grabbed the collar of one of the military squad members who was leading the group. Bang! The gun in the man's hand shook due to the sudden force and fell to the ground. The others didn't expect such a scene to happen. Li Nanheng kicked him to the ground. Get lost. Just at the moment when the military members glared at him, the big leader who hurried over from behind also appeared. Seeing that the big leader didn't seem to have any intention of stopping them, he knew that the people of 11 Base must be released safely today. None of them could be detained. But just now they heard that it was 11 Base who killed their commander. In this case, how could they let him go? Li Nanheng tossed the phone to an elite team member. Contact the United Nations Department of Justice and relevant lawyers. Ask them to come and investigate this case. If necessary, 11 Base and Feng Ling will fully cooperate with the investigation. Right now Feng Ling is seriously injured. 11 Base will bring her back for treatment. She is in our hands and won't go missing. Under the muzzles of the military members, the black Hummer sped away without hesitation, raising a cloud of dust on the ground. The choking of the black Hummer almost made the military members cry. They looked in disbelief at the cars that took the people away so easily. In the car, the blood on Feng Ling's face and hands had been wiped clean by Kay with a wet tissue, but the wound on her forehead was very obvious. There was even some blood oozing out of the wound. Although it was not much, it could be seen that it was very serious. Feng Ling had been unconscious. Kay was a little worried and turned to look at Li Nanheng, who threw the lighter forward after sitting in the car and didn't speak again. Boss. Kay knew that even if he didn't know how Boss protected them this time, he must be very angry. After all, it was really not a small matter to kill someone in the military area. It was already a miracle that he successfully brought them out of the military area. When Kay spoke, his voice was a little apologetic. I'm really sorry, boss. We didn't expect things to turn out like this. These days, Feng Ling has been in front of me, but I didn't expect that such a big thing would happen when she went back to her room to change clothes. No need to explain. I've seen the surveillance footage. Li Nanheng didn't look back, but his voice was cold. Kay paused. Then boss, you should know that Feng Ling was also forced to do something. In the beginning she actually didn't. I know. Li Nanheng turned back and looked indifferently at Feng Ling, who was leaning against the back seat with her eyes closed and hadn't woken up yet. Glancing at the wound on her forehead, Li Nanheng picked up his cell phone and called Qin Sighting, who was in the United States these days. Without any nonsense, he just said coldly, Los Angeles 99 Fansby Avenue 10th floor, come over in half an hour. Bring the medical kit. With that he directly hung up the phone. Kay didn't know where this 99 Fansby was, but he usually didn't have much contact with Boss Lee. In the base, Boss Lee never told anyone about him, so he could only guess that it was Boss Lee's private residence. However, in this situation Feng Ling really couldn't directly return to the base, and it was not good to go to the hospital. It was best to ask a familiar doctor to treat Feng Ling's wound. Kay turned to look at Feng Ling, who had been unconscious. If that fat commander smashed her head a few more times, her skull would really crack. I've never seen such a crazy person. But boss, she has been unconscious for a long time. She should be fine, right? If she is, she won't have the strength to kill people and rush out. Li Nanheng's voice was low and cold. He didn't seem to be overly concerned. He just said lightly, I hit the back of her neck very hard so she can't wake up for the time being. Let her calm down while she is unconscious. Otherwise, can you suppress her with that indifferent gaze of hers just now? Kay immediately fell silent. Just now Feng Ling's gaze was indeed very unusual. It was as if she had changed into another person. If she did not have any mental illness, it could only mean that she was the real her. It was just that she had been hiding under the gentle and quiet surface. But in the end she was still provoked by the fat commander. Such a thin body had such a terrible explosive force, like a bloodthirsty wolf in the jungle. Kay sighed, picked up a wet tissue to wipe the blood on Feng Ling's ear, and then looked at her clothes. Boss, I won't wipe the blood on Feng Ling's body. I don't know if she had any other injuries before I went in. The doctor you called must give her a thorough examination. Li Nanheng didn't respond but looked through the rearview mirror at Feng Ling, who had been quietly leaning against the car door. He recalled the look she had given him just now. He still remembered that glimpse in the sauna room of the orphanage. At that time he couldn't see her face clearly and could only see her eyes, which were half blocked by the short bangs on her forehead. Just like that gaze just now, it was cold as if there was no human emotion, only a kind of anger and instinct to escape. What kind of experience could make a 13-year-old girl have such a gaze? When they arrived at the apartment of 99 Fansby Avenue, the car stopped downstairs. Lee Nanheng asked the others to get out of the car, and he personally opened the back door and carried the unconscious Feng Ling out. Kay and the others watched by the side. No one dared to speak, nor did they dare to follow in. Until Lee Nanheng carried Feng Ling into the door of the apartment, they looked at each other outside the door. This place was Boss's own residence. Boss directly carried Feng Ling into his place. Chapter 926. Feng Ling remained unconscious the entire way. Lee Nanheng carried her into the condo and placed her on the bed. He was about to take off all her blood-stained clothes, but when he unbuttoned her coat, he caught a glimpse of her slightly open blouse. He hesitated for a moment and only took off her coat. He could see the outline of the chest-wrapping cloth hidden under the thin blouse. Although the outline of the cloth wasn't obvious, those who didn't know what it was would only think it was another piece of clothing. Thankfully, it was only her jacket that was stained with blood. The rest of her body was relatively clean. He reached out and unbuttoned her shirt one by one. Originally, he planned to untie her chest cloth so that she could breathe more easily. However, when he unbuttoned her shirt, he saw the white cloth wrapped tightly around her body and paused. Knowing she was a woman was one thing. Seeing the chest wrapping around her body and seeing the truth of the matter was another matter. The man was silent for a moment. He turned back to wash a towel and wiped her face, neck and hands again. After confirming that the sticky blood on her body was gone, he pulled down her pants. The young girl's legs were slender and white, straight like jade. Without the disguise that she usually wore, she just lay there quietly. Because of the medicinal effect in her body was boiling hot, and if he were to accidentally touch her, he would feel a scalding sensation. Lee Nanheng took the blood-stained trousers and walked out. He threw them away, picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. Xiao Su, bring me a set of Feng Ling's combat uniform. It has to be exactly the same as what she is wearing now. Xiao Su was a little confused. Oh, okay. Exactly the same, why does it have to be exactly the same? What is the emphasis point of the exact same? But since boss said so, Xiao Su could only hurry to find it. He remembered that the clothes Feng Ling wore seemed to be the autumn uniforms of 11 base. She should have several. After making the call, Lee Nanheng did not immediately return to the bedroom. Instead, he picked up the lighter on the coffee table, tilted his head and lit a cigarette. As the white smoke lingered, the feeling of abstinence became stronger. The room was very quiet. Feng Ling was unconscious in the bedroom, and Lee Nanheng was smoking in the living room. Time passed bit by bit until Xiao Su hurriedly brought the clothes over. Lee Nanheng took the clothes and casually threw the blood-stained clothes he had just helped Feng Ling take off to him. Dispose of them. Xiao Su took the clothes and realized that boss had taken off Feng Ling's clothes. But at this time no one dared to gossip. Everyone knew what had happened, so no one dared to be negligent. Xiao Su didn't say much, nodded and left with the clothes. The man took the clean clothes, turned back, pressed the cigarette into the ashtray and stood still by the coffee table. His cold aura of a young master of a warlord family was instantly revealed. Qin Sighting had already driven over and would soon come with the medicine box. Lee Nanheng brought the combat uniform into the bedroom and helped her put it on again, in case she woke up and was shocked because her secret was discovered. The sky outside the window was dark. In the dim light of the bedroom, the girl was unconscious. Her face was pale and there was a large scar on her forehead. Under the light, Lee Nanheng already felt that he was the one who had been drugged. From the little girl's feet to her legs, bit by bit, until the pants were buttoned and the belt was buckled for her. The man's body was already covered in a thin layer of sweat. Then just as he was about to button up her blouse, when he touched the cloth on her chest, the man's hand paused. He looked at the unconscious girl and the deep and obvious ravine that was squeezed out of the cloth because it was wrapped too tightly. He suddenly thought of the feeling he had felt before. At this time, everything that popped up in his mind was based on instinct, and these instincts were almost impossible to suppress. He should have known the truth and put her safely by his side instead of letting her join the sniper team and stand under so many people's gazes to attract attention. He should have stripped her clean clothes long ago. Otherwise, who knew how long this little liar would lie to him? When he looked at the girl's sleeping face, some emotions erupted like a volcano and could no longer be hidden in his eyes. Feng Ling, who was unconscious, had no idea what kind of environment she was in, nor did she know that she was about to be slaughtered by the man she had been guarding against. However, her natural acuity and instinct made her feel some kind of unknown danger in her sleep. Even though she was unconscious, she still frowned slightly. However, her eyelids were very heavy and her consciousness was blurred. Her body was unusually hot and she could not open her eyes no matter what. She thought that she could hide it again and again since she had hidden it for so long. However, Li Nanheng had not been at the base in the past few years, which gave her a chance to continue deceiving him. However, time and time again, coincidences and suspicions, coupled with an accidental mistake, in the end such a fatal secret was completely placed in front of the man's eyes. If it were any other time, it would not be so easy for Li Nanheng to see the clothes she was wearing and see her clearly. She was quiet and obedient, which was rare for her to be unconscious. Li Nanheng looked down at the girl on the bed who seemed to be conscious but could not wake up. He looked at her fair face under her black hair and the glaring wound on her forehead. If the doorbell hadn't suddenly rang at this moment, he would have taken off her pants again. After all, she was also drugged. After all, it was not the first time he wanted to be a beast like this. After all, since she dared to kill someone, she dared to bear the consequences. Since he had helped her, she should lie on his bed after doing something wrong and cry fiercely in the way he wanted. Otherwise, he would be too sorry for the 220 km/h speed and the soaring blood pressure when he drove into the military area. The man's eyes were dark, and he forcibly suppressed the desire that even he felt was a beast. He casually buttoned up Feng Ling's thin shirt, covered the chest wrapping cloth inside, and then covered her with the quilt. He turned to open the door. However, as soon as the man turned to walk out of the bedroom, the girl on the bed could not suppress the drug in her body and suddenly let out a very light, cat-like moan. It was a very small sound, but it shook him to the point that he staggered and almost knocked into the door. Li Nanheng endured it. When he heard the doorbell again, he suddenly walked out with a dark expression, opened the door and said coldly to the handsome man in a white shirt outside the door who was carrying a medicine box, "Can't you King come later?" Qin sighting. Chapter 927. Are doctors so punctual now? Li Nanheng's face was dark. Qin sighting. Didn't you King say you want me to arrive in half an hour? And you sound as though it's a matter of life and death. At the same time, Qin sighting glanced inside. What's wrong? Is there a situation? I'll go downstairs for a cup of coffee before coming up. Li Nanheng turned around expressionlessly and gestured for him to come in. Come in. Save them first. Qin sighting glanced at him and snorted. I've never seen you so nervous before. Who's injured? Is it a man or a woman? Don't talk nonsense. Let's go in and save them. Li Nanheng turned and went in. Qin sighting sighed with a smile. It's not like you to be so mysterious. However, human lives were at stake and now was not the time to joke around. The man in the white shirt casually rolled up his sleeves and walked in. Seeing Feng Ling lying quietly on the bed and the serious wound on her forehead, Qin sighting walked straight to the bed to check her wound. After checking, he turned to Li Nanheng. How did you get hurt? How long have you been unconscious? Qin sighting took the phone and saw that it was a surveillance video that had just been sent to his phone. After watching it as quickly as possible, he did not say anything, put down the phone and rummaged through the medicine box to deal with it. At the same time he said, "You only asked me to bring the medicine box over, so I thought it was just a skin injury. The collision is so serious. I'm not sure if his brain is affected or if he has a concussion. I know it's not convenient for the people of 11 Base to go to the hospital, but you'd better take time to have a checkup." I knocked her out. Li Nanheng stood by the bed and said lightly. Qin sighting's hand that was disinfecting the wound on Feng Ling's forehead paused slightly. He turned to look at the man with a calm and indifferent expression and then withdrew his gaze to continue treating the wound. I was wondering why she was in a coma for so long when she has the strength to kill someone. I think she's been traumatized. I don't want her to hurt herself. Qin sighting focused on checking Feng Ling's other injuries. When he was about to lift the quilt, Li Nanheng glanced at his hands and said coldly, "If you see anything you shouldn't see, remember to keep your mouth shut." Qin sighting paused, put the quilt back and put his hand on Feng Ling's wrist. After feeling her pulse for a while, he snorted. No wonder he has such short hair. He's clearly a young man, but no matter how I look at him, he looks like a woman. He's really a woman. Li Nanheng caught a glimpse of his action and frowned slightly. You also know how to feel the pulse. Qin Siding returned to the medicine box and picked up the medical disinfectant, cotton, and other medical drugs. He did not look at him. Since I've stepped into the medical world, I should understand everything that needs to be understood. For me, Chinese medicine and Western medicine are both compulsory courses. She's the heir of the Qin family, but she abandoned business to become a doctor. That woman Shiniange is really a scammer. Hearing this, Qin Siding's expression did not change at all. He continued to deal with the wound on Feng Ling's head and said, although I'm a doctor and don't think too much about the patient's body, seeing that you don't want me to see it, I won't touch it. After I leave, remember to check if there are any other injuries on her body. I've seen the video just now. From the looks of the fight, even if there are injuries, they should only be bruises from bumping into something. It shouldn't be too serious. The wound on her head needs to be changed twice a day. When it's time to change the dressing, I'll remind you. I'll leave the dressing here and you can change it yourself. Since Shiniange left, Qin Siding, who was originally silent and distant, became even more reticent. Especially when the people around him mentioned that woman's name, he always avoided mentioning it. However, when he saw Qin Siding smear the medicine on the wound on Feng Ling's forehead and saw the large bloody wound on the wall, a desire to blow up those people in the military region surged in his heart. The commander should be thankful that he was killed by a knife. Otherwise, if he fell into his hands, who knew how he would torture him to death? After temporarily pasting the medical gauze on the wound, Qin Siding examined Feng Ling's hands and arms. There were no other obvious injuries. There was only a blood stain on her palm caused by the dagger. It was not too serious. It could be seen that although she was in a hurry, her skills were not bad. She did not injure herself too much. When disinfecting and applying medicine on the wound on her palm, Qin Siding saw a thin callus on Feng Ling's palm. From the position of the callus, he could tell that it was a member of the 11 base who held a gun all year round. After watching for a moment, he said in a low voice, "What's wrong with her? You hit her in the base? Such a beautiful girl, her hair is so short and there are thin calluses on her hands. Is this how you treat a little girl?" Li Nanheng stood by the bed, looking down at Qin Siding's movements when he applied medicine on her, and did not explain with a dark face. When he placed Feng Ling's hand back on the bed, Qin Siding stood up, packed up the medicine box and prepared to leave. "You're leaving?" Li Nanheng glanced back at him. "Otherwise, should I stay and drink with you? Your short-haired little beauty's pulse is abnormal, and your whole body is burning and your face is red. It's obvious that you've been drugged. If I don't leave, do I have to stay here and watch you act as the antidote?" Li Nanheng immediately retracted his gaze stiffly and then said stiffly, "Goodbye, I won't send you off." Qin Siding sneered, and when he changed his shoes in front of the door, he said, "When she wakes up, remember to take her to the hospital for some simple examinations. Just check if she has a concussion. I've touched the wound on her forehead earlier. It's not a big problem, but that kind of violent impact should give her a headache for a few days. Pay more attention." With that, Qin Siding very calmly and tactfully did not intend to continue being a third wheel. Without waiting for him to respond, he left and very considerately closed the door outside. The room returned to silence, and only Feng Ling, who was in a coma, appeared to be quiet and motionless, but gradually began to breathe rapidly. Her cheeks, which had been pale earlier, were indeed slightly red, and even her neck seemed to be suffused with a rosy color. Li Nanheng walked over, lifted the quilt, and was about to check if there were any other injuries on her body. The buttons on the girl's thin shirt were unbuttoned one by one. The man's eyes darkened and even his breathing changed. He, who had always been calm, suddenly felt thirsty at this moment. Very, very thirsty. The light in the room was emitted from the wall lamp in front of the bed, and it was slightly dim. The man casually turned on the chandelier in the room. When the dazzling light lit up, he told himself that it was only to check her other injuries. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.